Chapter 489. GOR Chapter 450 Cavishier's Gamble, 8,000 words. Speaking of Cavishier's assassination, Shea suddenly perked up. He stared intently at Junker and his ears perked up. It was not for anything else. That fellow's death was filled with too many suspicious points. Or rather, for someone like Cavishier, even if there were no suspicious points in his death, considering his identity, it would cause one's imagination to run wild. Junker could also sense the seriousness in Shea's eyes. He took a deep breath and his face gradually took on a peculiar expression. Teacher's assassination, in fact. His tone became increasingly strange. In fact, it was all arranged by Teacher himself. As expected, if it were not for the fact that he had mentally prepared himself, Shea would have jumped out of his chair. After hearing those words, Shea quickly turned his head to look around. He looked around the small reception room for a long time, seemingly trying to find something. It also felt as though Cavishier was secretly spying on him. Seeing Shea's reaction, Junker and the young woman sighed inwardly. Junker then said in a heavy tone, "That assassination was part of Teacher's plan. I was the one who arranged it." Pausing, he then continued in a low voice, "On the day of the assassination, the route, time and location of Teacher's carriage were all predetermined. The people in charge of the assassination were also chosen by me from the Dark Knight Imperial Forest." Hearing that, Shea frowned. Using the men of the Dark Knight Imperial Forest to assassinate Cavishier, Junker saw the frown on Shea's face and smiled bitterly. There was no other way around it. In order to make that act real, we had to use elite soldiers with high skills. At the same time, they also had to be reliable and willing to carry out orders unconditionally. In Osgilla City, such people were not easy to find. In the end, we decided to use the men of the Dark Knight Imperial Forest to do it. The men of the Dark Knight Imperial Forest are all men of sacrifice. They will never hesitate to carry out orders. No matter who the other party is, once the order is given, they will not hesitate to carry it out. This matter was not complicated at all. I am the leader of the Dark Knight Imperial Forest. I faked an order from the late Emperor and arranged for several elites to ambush Teacher on the road. He was the one who caused the assassination. The elites of the Dark Knight Imperial Forest were very suitable for this task. These guys are men of sacrifice loyal to the Emperor. Junker faked an order to assassinate Cavishier. Even if the people who received the order were suspicious, these men of the Dark Knight Imperial Forest would carry it out without hesitation. But, if that is the case, wouldn't things would be difficult? Shea smiled bitterly and said, "This is simply an act, but the assassins you arranged in Dark Knight Imperial Forest don't know about this, they really did it. Aren't you afraid that Cavishier might accidentally get killed?" After listening to Shea's words, Junker's complexion suddenly became extremely ugly. His face was ashen as he gritted his teeth and said, "At that time, this plan was decided by Teacher. I had also raised this concern. I was worried that those assassins from Dark Knight Imperial Forest would really hurt Teacher. But Teacher only told me to go ahead and do it. I don't have to worry about this problem." When he said this, he sighed. Teacher is a god. I believed him at that time. There was no doubt in my heart. Since Teacher said there was no problem, then there must be no problem. At that time I thought so. But I didn't expect that Teacher would lie to me. In the eyes of this middle-aged man, there was a deep sense of pain. His fists were clenched, his fingers were white and his arms were faintly trembling. When Shea heard this, his heart sank. He turned to look at the girl. What does this mean?" The girl also smiled bitterly, but didn't answer his question. Instead, she looked at Junker, pursed her lips, and then opened her mouth. Her voice was soft and gentle, with a hint of comfort. "Well, Junker, this is also the Teacher's intention. You are just following his wishes. Teacher knew that if you knew the truth, you wouldn't dare to do it. That's why he hid it from you. Think about it, if Teacher had told you everything, you wouldn't have dared to carry out this plan. Junker's lips trembled, his face pale. Looking at the girl, he shook his head. What you said may be right. But at that time I never thought that I would actually kill Teacher just like that. Teacher. You can say that he died in my hands. Boom. This sentence, Shea heard it clearly. Not a single word was ambiguous. His mind suddenly roared, and he only felt his mouth go dry. For a moment, he didn't know whether to be shocked or ridiculous. Dead? Cavalier, he actually died? He was really killed by Junker? Before Shea could say anything, Junker had already slumped heavily into the chair. Both his hands were clutching his head as he spoke in a hoarse and trembling voice. Teacher died in my hands. I personally gave the order to carry out this plan. If Enough. The girl sighed and stood up. She slowly walked to Junker's side and placed a slender hand on Junker's shoulder. She patted him gently and said in a low voice, I know that you have been feeling guilty and blaming yourself all this time. These days you have been under a lot of pressure. You have shouldered enough. These things are not your fault. You should not have to shoulder them. You just need to remember, this is Teacher's own will. He chose this method of death for himself. This was because his teacher believed that this was the most valuable way to die. Junker, there is no need for you to blame yourself. Junker's voice was already choking with sobs. Hearing the girl's words, he gently shook his head. However, his emotions were still unable to calm down. The girl turned her head to look at Shea. Her pair of eyes were still as calm as water. She softly said, Junker's emotions are not very stable. Then, I will continue to explain to you, Lord Shea. Shea was also confused. Hearing the girl's words, he subconsciously nodded. He opened his mouth as if wanting to ask something. However, there were so many things in his mind that he didn't know where to start. When my teacher was alive, he once told me that the Empire's national power was already rotten beyond repair. Although he had supported His Majesty Cantos for half of his life, he had never been able to reverse the situation. This was often cited by my teacher as the greatest regret of his life. However, although His Majesty Cantos seemed to trust him, in fact, His Majesty was a stubborn person. In his early years, he was high-spirited and full of vigor. Unfortunately, when he was young, His Majesty's foundation was not stable and he acted too hastily. Later, after several setbacks, His Majesty gradually grew older and his health was not as good as before. He became hesitant and even overcautious. Being too sharp in the early years and being too indecisive later on were two extremes. Both were not good enough. Unfortunately, Teacher was by His Majesty's side, but His Majesty had always been obstinate and self-opinionated on these most important matters. He was not willing to listen to Teacher. Moreover, Teacher also said that His Majesty was actually somewhat guarded against Teacher in his heart. The girl spoke tirelessly. At this point, a mocking smile appeared on her pretty face. The late Emperor of our empire should have kept a low profile when he was young and had a stable foundation. However, he acted in a high-profile manner and acted too hastily. This aroused the strong vigilance of the warlord's henchmen. As a result, he was restrained in all aspects. Later on, when he grew older and had a foundation, he should be bold enough to reform. However, His Majesty ran into a wall in his early years and became too cautious. Teacher was also helpless against such an emperor. No matter how wise and farsighted Teacher was, he was not the emperor and could not act on behalf of the emperor. As a result, the state of the empire became more and more corrupt, and the warlords gradually became more and more out of control. Teacher spent decades of painstaking effort, but could only limit them as much as possible. Shea nodded. He felt that what the girl said was somewhat reasonable. The girl continued, It was only when Emperor Cantos grew old that the late emperor saw that his health was really on the verge of collapse. The state of affairs became increasingly serious and had reached a point of no return. After that, Teacher advised His Majesty that if he did not act boldly, the situation would really be irreversible. At that time, His Majesty was already seriously ill and did not have much time left. After much persuasion from Teacher, he still did not dare to make up his mind. However, he began to make arrangements for his funeral. He arranged for the Crown Prince to leave the imperial capital and to join the Roadrier Corps. This was also Teacher's suggestion. Although His Majesty accepted the suggestion, he could not make up his mind to take action against the warlords. Teacher had no choice but to force His Majesty, and also, "Wait, what you said is too vague. Why can't I understand?" Shea interrupted her and said loudly, "What arrangements for his funeral? What do you mean by taking action against the warlords? What exactly is going on?" The girl looked at Shea and frowned. Then she sighed softly as if she was talking to herself. "Teacher, you have given me a very difficult task. This guy is more slow than I thought." She shook her head and looked at Shea with a mocking smile. "All right, let me tell you from the beginning. Shea, the warlords and the imperial family have always regarded each other as mortal enemies. For the past 100 years, this conflict has been irreconcilable. The imperial family is at a disadvantage in terms of strength, but they have the legal authority in name. The warlords, on the other hand, have great strength. However, they have always been troubled by the lack of legal authority to fight against the imperial family. In order to deal with the imperial family, the warlords have always schemed to restrict the imperial family from developing their own strength. In particular, they have restricted the imperial family's control over the military. The central army of the empire is the direct line of command nurtured by the imperial family. At present, the central army of the empire used to have a total of 13 corps. However, some of the corps suffered heavy losses in the previous wars. Some were rebuilt after the war, while some were simply revoked due to their heavy losses. Shea, when you joined the army, you were in the 13th Corps of the Central Army of the Empire, which was the Roadrier Corps. At that time, the Empire also had the 2nd Corps, 3rd Corps, 6th Corps, 7th Corps, and 9th Corps. There were a total of 6 corps, all of which were under the control of the imperial family. As for the other corps, although there were still the 1st, 4th, 5th Corps, and so on in name, they no longer exist. Some of them were revoked due to their losses in the previous wars, while others were taken over by the warlords and taken over by the local Tima military district. Therefore, during the last war with the Odin, which was when Shea joined the army, the central army of the empire only had 6 corps, although nominally there were 13 corps. The central army of the 6th Corps is regarded as the sphere of influence of the imperial family. It is also the place where the imperial family nurtures and places important positions in the Eagle Corps. The imperial family spent a large amount of revenue to equip the central army. It is also the capital that the imperial family relies on to fight against the warlord. Naturally, it is highly valued. However, from another perspective, it is a thorn in the side of the warlords. At any time, only when one has control of the army can one have the right to speak. Everyone understands this principle. The warlords would naturally not sit back and watch the imperial family control too much of the army because that would threaten their position. However, in name, the emperor is the ruler of the country. The warlords could not openly stop the emperor from controlling the central army, so they could only use other methods to deal with the imperial family. For example, controlling the amount of military expenditure. At that time, Salvatore was still the Minister of Military Affairs. Reducing the military expenditure of the Central Army was one of the methods. Other than that, there were other methods such as infiltration and roping in. When you joined the army, only 6 of the 13 Central Army Corps were left. Some of the others had been disbanded, while others only existed in name. Even so, the warlords were still not at ease. Apart from using all kinds of methods, They also had another big killer move to weaken the eagle core of the imperial family. At this point, the girl glanced at Shea and said faintly, "What better way to weaken the army than to fight a war? Once a war starts, there will be mountains of corpses and seas of blood. Countless lives, money, and food will be spent, killing 1,000 enemies, but losing 800 of our own. After a war, the army will lose a lot." Of course, at that time, the warlords did not openly rebel, nor did they send their own troops to fight the Central Army. Their method was very simple. They secretly colluded with the Odin, promised some benefits, and let the wolf into the house. Let the Odin invade, start a war with the outside world, and then use this to weaken the Central Army's strength. For the imperial family, this was a very contradictory situation. On one hand, if the Odin invades, the emperor, as the ruler of the country, has the obligation to order the army to resist. This is because one of the imperial family's greatest reliance is the righteous name. If the emperor does not order the army to resist the invasion, he will lose the support of the people, and even his righteous name will be lost. So, he had no choice but to fight. On the other hand, Tima military district is not at the border. The northern border, Moore County, Notts County, and other places are all controlled by the imperial family. Once the Odin invades, the imperial family's areas will be the first to be damaged. In this situation, the imperial family has no choice but to send their own troops to resist. On the other hand, the warlords in Tima military district will just sit back and watch. Therefore, in every war with the Odin, the imperial family's troops will be damaged. After a war, whether they win or lose, the Central Army's strength will be weakened. I can tell you clearly that the last war you experienced last year, the Battle of Albacete Plain, and the war with the Odin on Wildfire Plain, was actually secretly controlled by the warlords. We have evidence that the warlords and the Odin colluded in that war. When the Odin invaded, the warlords took control of the military and embezzled military funds and supplies, forcing the Central Army to set up a temporary war zone in the north and take control of the logistics to prevent the warlords from meddling. But after the war, our hands and feet were tied. The Odin came straight in, but it was as if they knew the situation of our troops and defenses like the back of their hand. The warlords were behind this. After saying all this, the girl looked at Shea and said with disdain, "Do you understand?" "I understand." Shea gritted his teeth. "Good, then let's continue with Teacher's matter." The girl said calmly, "Teacher's plan is to force the warlords to rebel. This is a huge gamble. According to Teacher's calculations, the key points are all linked and cannot be left out. He first encouraged the late emperor to make up his mind and then suggested that His Majesty send the Crown Prince to the capital to protect the Roadrear army. This action would alert the warlord party. If the Crown Prince is sent to the capital, Salvatore and the others will be alarmed and think that the imperial family will make a big move. And according to his teacher's conjecture about Salvatore's temperament, that guy would most likely repeat his old tricks and secretly collude with the Odins to launch another invasion. That was the first step of the plan and it was a success. After saying that, the girl paused for a moment before casually explaining, back then, Teacher had sent Sister Vaya to the Odin kingdom to make some arrangements and preparations. He had obtained information about the collusion between Salvatore and the Odin kingdom. As for the Crown Prince, he had already arrived at the Roadrear army. After the success of the first step, Teacher was ready to carry out the second step. What? Cleansing the warlords in the capital. The girl said coolly, "This is a dangerous gamble." Teacher wanted to force the warlords to rebel. Force them to rebel. At that time, the emperor was old and the empire was being possessed by the warlords, a malignant tumor. If this were to continue, in a few years, the imperial family might not even have the strength to fight. That was the last chance. If I had not taken action back then, the late emperor would have passed away and a new emperor would have succeeded. Waiting for the new emperor to establish his foundation and establish a firm foothold would have taken many years. By that time, the empire would have been hollowed out by the malignant tumor known as the warlords. There would be no chance for a comeback. Therefore, teacher had no choice but to take the risk. In the last moments of the late emperor's reign, I had to go all out. Otherwise, I would only be waiting for death in the future. Therefore, the beginning of the plan was to deliberately alert the warlords and lure them into seducing the Odin kingdom to invade. The first step was not difficult. Even if Salvatore did not take the bait, teacher would have colluded with the Odin kingdom to invade. Sister Vaya had already made some preparations in the Odin kingdom. The invasion of the Odin kingdom was the most important step. Luring the wolf into the house, this was the first step of teacher's plan. Shea's heart thumped wildly as he listened. These shocking words caused his mind to buzz. For a moment, he even forgot to ask about the details of the Sister Vaya that the girl had mentioned. The invasion of the Odin kingdom was seen as the most important step because the most important part of teacher's plan was to give up on the lands in the north and stop the imperial family's central army from resisting. Pa! Shea could not help but slam the table and fly into a rage. What kind of *T plan is this? The girl was calm in the face of Shea's scolding. This is not a *T plan. In fact, it is an ingenious plan. She shook her head. Giving up the lands in the north and the central army not resisting is the most important part. Teacher was sure that with the ambition of the Odin kingdom, once they enter the empire's territory and reap the benefits, they will definitely not give up just like that. The Odin kingdom are like wolves, greedy and insatiable. Feeding them a little bit of benefits will not only not make them full, but will also make them more hungry. After giving away more county and the other counties in the north, we will feed them to the Odin kingdom. Once the ambition of the Odin kingdom is stimulated, they will want to reap even more benefit. Next, we will have to face the land of the Tima military district. Shea took a deep breath. This was an obvious fact. After the Odin kingdom invaded and occupied Moore County, Ilton County and the other counties in the north, their ambition would be stimulated. If they still wanted to reap more benefits, they would have to face the Tima military district of the warlord party directly. When that time comes, the ambitious Odin kingdom would not consider the warlord party as an ally who had colluded with them to invade. In the face of great benefits, any kind of ally could be abandoned. Cavisher's plan was nothing more than to lure the Odin kingdom into the north at the cost of giving away the other counties in the north. In the end, Odin kingdom and the warlord party would start fighting, driving the tiger to devour the wolf. This was a classic example of driving the tiger to devour the wolf. If the Odin kingdom wanted to satisfy their greed, they would have to attack the warlord party. Once the Odin kingdom and the warlord party started fighting, regardless of whether the warlord party won or lost, they would suffer great losses. The second part of the plan is to form an alliance with the Lantis kingdom. The young woman smiled faintly and said, "The Lantis kingdom has always had a hidden ambition for the mainland. As a maritime nation, the Lantis kingdom's ambition for the mainland has been something that they have been dreaming of for generations. However, with the two great powers coexisting on the mainland, there is no opportunity for them to get involved. Teacher's second part of the plan is to drag the Lantis kingdom into this gamble. By giving them some benefits, we will make this situation even more complicated." "Isn't that the same as betraying the country?" Shea frowned. "Sigh." The young woman was silent for a moment before sighing. "This is also something that teacher has been hesitating about. However, in the face of two evils, we will choose the lesser. Although the Lantis people were interested in the benefits of the continent, they couldn't swallow too much. Their nature as a maritime nation meant that their appetite wasn't too big. Giving them some benefits was at least 100 times better than being destroyed by those warlords. As long as the Empire can eradicate the threat posed by the warlord party and have a decade of stability, the Lantis kingdom will not be a problem in the future. Shea pondered for a moment before nodding his head, agreeing with the young woman's words. The third part of the plan is to force the warlord party to rebel. After the civil war begins, we will gather the army under the control of the imperial family and defend the front line of Osgilla. Give up on the north, completely give up. Let the Odin kingdom invade. As long as we gather the army to defend Osgilla, we will be able to hold on. After some time, the Odin kingdom will definitely have a conflict with the warlord party. At that time, we will have our chance. According to Teacher's plan, as long as we have the support of the Lantis kingdom and our own army to defend Osgilla, there should not be a problem. There are always risks involved in gambling. Besides, Teacher said that although the warlord party is powerful, they are not a single entity. Instead, they are formed by dozens of small groups. In times of prosperity, they can maintain unity for a short period of time. However, after a long period of time, once there are conflicts of interest, they will split. This Teacher's calculations are correct. After saying that, the young woman exhaled deeply. Ally with the Lantis kingdom and give up on the north. Tolerate the invasion of the Odin kingdom and wait for the Odin kingdom to have an internal conflict with the warlord party. When the warlord party splits, we will finally have the opportunity to win. Teacher's overall plan is roughly like this. From what I can see, even if Teacher's plan is not completely correct, it is at least 90% correct. Shea was dumbfounded. Cavalier, what a big gamble! What a big gamble! However, even Shea had to admit that this damned old lunatic had made the right bet. Giving up on the north of the Empire and allowing the Odin kingdom to invade, the Central Army retreated to the front line of Osgilla to defend the imperial capital. The invasion of the Odin kingdom did not satisfy their appetite. As expected, Manning could not help but swallow up the Corsica military region, although there was a factor of Shea sowing discord. But looking at the overall situation, even if Shea hadn't tampered with it, Odin's people wouldn't have been able to hold themselves back after a long time. This was something that was bound to happen in the face of benefits. The annexation of the Corsica military region by the Odin kingdom directly caused the Rebel Alliance to split. Wherever the Odin kingdom went, the Rebel Alliance's military regions in the north were all in danger. After the internal division, the Rebel army was no longer a unified entity. The addition of the Lantis kingdom, the alliance with the Empire, officially intervening in the war on the continent. The Lantis kingdom's army landed and became a powerful foreign aid for the Byzantine Empire. All of these things had happened in the past year. And all of this was because of that damned crazy Cavalier. He had actually planned all of this a long time ago. It was as if everything that happened in the past year was going according to his plan, step by step. Although there were some small mistakes and accidents in the details, but overall, 90% of his plan had been realized. In the past year, the biggest accident was the fall of Osgilla. This accident was not something Teacher could have predicted. With a famous general like General Adric, there were still tens of thousands of soldiers in the city and Lantis kingdom's reinforcements on the sea. The fall of the imperial capital could only be considered an accident. Fortunately, we were able to turn the situation around. The girl smiled bitterly and said, Teacher had said that this was a gamble and a gamble must have its risks. He told me that even God could not guarantee that every decision would be correct. Teacher had already done his best for the Empire to come up with this plan of seeking survival in the midst of death. Whether or not it would succeed in the end, even Teacher himself was not certain. Fortunately, it seems that the situation has been turned around. Hearing that, Shea could not help but break out in cold sweat. Then, he frowned and said, Cavalier? That Teacher, he. According to my understanding of him, I'm afraid he's not that great. His words were a bit disrespectful to Cavashir, but the girl wasn't angry. She looked at Shea, then looked at Junker, who was full of self-blame, and finally whispered, "What you said can't be considered wrong. From the beginning to the end, my teacher had only told me the truth about this plan. Even Junker, my teacher didn't tell him. Junker, I've told you before that you really don't have to blame yourself. The assassination was arranged by my teacher himself. At that time, even if you didn't assassinate him, my teacher didn't have much time left. My teacher's health had actually deteriorated a lot in recent years. The late emperor was already terminally ill, and our teacher, actually, he wasn't that far off. If you want to know what happened next, please go to www.chidian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 490. GOR Chapter 451 Assassination Bloody Hell. I knew it. Shea shook his head and sighed again and again. However, even he himself did not know what he was sighing about. Cavashir, that fellow, he actually died. Such a miraculous fellow, he actually died? Even until the very last moment, Shea believed that it was impossible for that fellow to truly die. Even now, after the young woman had finished speaking, if the door to the room were to suddenly open and Cavashir walked in with a smile on his face, Shea would not be surprised at all. That fellow was a miraculous existence to begin with. Even if he did die, there might come a day when he would suddenly be resurrected and appear before everyone. Shea sighed as the young woman looked at him from the side. After a while, Shea suddenly slapped his thigh as a thought flashed through his mind. He shouted loudly, "No, that's not right." "What's not right?" The young woman smiled as she looked at Shea. "That's not right." Shea was suddenly enraged. He slammed his fist onto the table, causing it to shatter into pieces. Shea stood up and clenched both his fists. He shouted furiously, "That's not right. That old fellow, he is trying to harm Lao Tzu." The young woman did not say anything. She continued to smile as she looked at Shea. Shea's face turned livid and he shouted. He had long since come up with a plan. Giving up on the northern counties and allowing Odin's men to enter and engage in a dogfight with the rebel army, that is one thing. If he was willing to make such an arrangement and gamble, that is his business. But why would he want to harm Lao Tzu? Shea's heart was filled with rage, and he was unable to restrain his anger. Back when I entered the imperial capital to receive my reward, the late emperor had treated me well. I knew that this old fellow had something to do with it. Now that I think about it, the reason I was appointed as the military officer of Moore County was because of him. Isn't this old fellow harming others? Since he had already made plans and plans, once the war broke out, the North would be a mess. It was a mountain of blades and a sea of flames. The Odin's invasion, the rebel army's secession, the flames of war. Under these circumstances, he still sent me to Moore to be that damned military officer. If this isn't harming me, then what is? It was all thanks to Lao Tzu's luck. If Lao Tzu's luck was any worse, he would have died long ago. What kind of grudge do I have with this old man? He's actually trying to torment Lao Tzu like this. The more Shea thought about it, the angrier he got. He almost flipped the table. If Cavashir was really standing in front of him at this moment, Shea would probably rush up and fight this old man to the death. If it wasn't for this old man, why would he have to risk his life in Moore Prefecture? Based on his previous military exploits, he would have been appointed as a local official in some small peaceful city in the south. He would have become a local tyrant and lived a leisurely life. Unlike now, he had to risk his life against Odin's people and fight against the rebel army. He had to dance on the edge of a blade, struggling all the way here and nearly dying several times. This is the way teacher is grooming you. The girl opened her mouth at the right time. Just as Shea was about to explode in anger, the girl's light words seemed to be stuck on Shea's neck. If it wasn't for teacher's arrangements, Shea, would you be where you are today? Shea. The girl sighed faintly and slowly said, Teacher has always been a good judge of character. He has high expectations for you. In order to groom you, in order to pave a way for you to succeed, Teacher has already done his best. Shea. Don't be ungrateful. Teacher didn't send you to the north to harm you, but to let you, this stubborn piece of iron, be thrown into the great furnace to be tempered into steel. After a pause, the girl laughed coldly. Otherwise, with your previous military exploits, it wouldn't be difficult to give you a position. A barren title would be enough to reward you. Why would he give you the position of military chief? Although the military chief of a prefecture is also at the emblem group level, he has a lot of real power and is independent and not restricted by the local government. You can do whatever you want. Otherwise, if you were given an emblem group level position, how could you, Shea, have the power you have today? Shea frowned. Let's talk about the place first. The northern prefectures didn't allow you to go to Knott's Prefecture or Ilton Prefecture, but they chose Moore Prefecture for you. Why is that? Moore Prefecture has the advantage of border trade and is very close to Wildfire Town. That's your familiar place. You're familiar with the environment there, so it's naturally beneficial for you to use it. Furthermore, the previous governor of Moore Prefecture was an honest and hard-working official. Moore Prefecture's foundation is also the best among the northern prefectures. There's plenty of food and resources, giving you the best foundation. That's the geographical advantage. If you were given Knott's Prefecture, there would be the Central Army station there. How would you be able to use it? If you were given Ilton Prefecture, you would have to face the Corsica military at all times. You wouldn't even have the chance to use it. Moore Prefecture is the best foundation that Teacher has chosen for you. Teacher had spent a lot of time and effort just on the selection of the location. Speaking of people, what kind of person do you think Mad Dog Grimm is? He's a veteran general in the army. Although he was previously considered guilty and had lost his power after being idle, with his prestige and reputation, even if he was suppressed by the warlord party, where couldn't he go if he really wanted to do something? With his status and connections in the Eagle faction, if he followed that fatso roar to the Roadrear army, or the 2nd or 9th Army, would he not have a chance to make a name for himself? Moreover, at that time, Adric had already arrived at the imperial capital. He was vaguely the future number 1 in the army. If Grimm had stayed in the imperial capital, Adric would have naturally appreciated his talent. When that time came, how difficult would it be to arrange a position for Grimm in the city guard? Why would Grimm take a fancy to a kid with no qualifications like you? He'd rather follow you to Moore Prefecture. A veteran general of the Empire, yet he's willing to be a battalion commander? If it weren't for Teacher's arrangement, even if Grimm had a good impression of you, why would he really lower himself to work under you? Shea's eyes widened. You mean, the girl nodded. Before Grimm left the mountain, he had paid a visit to Teacher and had a long talk with him. In the end, he decided to go to your place. Pausing, the girl stared at Shea and said in a deep voice, Grimm, the veteran general, is the person Teacher had carefully selected to assist you. Hearing that, Shea's emotions calmed down a little. After a moment of consideration, he frowned. Even so, the north is too dangerous. Since Cavashir had predicted the future, when the Odin people invade the south, the first thing they would do is to attack my territory. Behind me, in front of me are the Odin people and behind me is the rebel army's territory. Being caught in the middle, when war breaks out, there's only a slim chance of survival. The girl coldly interrupted Shea. Are you dead now? Shea blinked and swallowed his saliva. That, naturally I'm not dead. Since you're not dead, isn't that enough? The girl frowned. But Lao Tzu struggled all the way here. Who knows how many dangers he had to go through, how many times was he nearly, you are the person Teacher has chosen. The girl's expression suddenly turned solemn. Her face and tone were incomparably solemn as she stared at Shea and slowly said, "Teacher has taken a fancy to you. Naturally, it's not to give you a noble and idle position and let you steadily rise up the ranks and become a rich man. Teacher has chosen you because he hopes that you can achieve great things. Heroes rise in troubled times. The situation in the north is indeed more complicated and more difficult. However, Teacher has already made so many arrangements for you. He has given you the best territory and assigned you the best subordinates. After giving you such conditions, if you, Shea, are still unable to accomplish anything, then it can only mean that you are incompetent. Even if you die, it will only be because of your own incompetence. You can't blame others. Shea, remember this. Heroes rise in troubled times. Only by throwing you into the troubled times in the north can you truly be tempered into steel. Only then will you be able to take advantage of the situation. If you were thrown into a peaceful and remote place in the south, you would only be a small local official. How would you become the current General Shea? Think about it carefully. The current you is so awe-inspiring. Even the Emperor has to give you face. You have tens of thousands of soldiers under your command and several counties under your control. The North is practically your world. Even if this empire can continue to exist or not, it is up to you, Shea, to decide. If you rebel now, this Byzantium will immediately be destroyed. Shea, the girl's tone turned cold. A single person's thoughts determine the survival of a country. Shea, you are a real man. Only by living in this world with such awe-inspiring might can you live your life in vain. If not for Teacher's arrangements and giving you this opportunity, would you be where you are today? A single person's thoughts determine the survival of a country. A single person's thoughts determine the survival of a country. These words fell into Shea's heart, and he suddenly felt the blood vessels in his chest spurting out, his blood boiling. A real man standing in this world with such awe-inspiring might can you live your life in vain. Thinking of this, although Shea's blood was boiling in his heart, he gradually calmed down on the surface. His original annoyance towards Cavasier had finally dissipated. After a long time, the girl looked at Shea and calmed down. She said lightly, "Lord Shea, have you thought it through?" Shea sighed and nodded heavily. Do you understand?" "Shea, I understand." The girl smiled and looked at the table in front of Shea, which had been smashed into smithereens. She said with a smile, "Your anger just now was really scary." Looking at the mess on the ground, she said, "The tea has also been spilled. This is not the way to treat a guest." After saying that, the girl stood up and walked to the door. She gently clapped her hands toward the door. Moments later, an old servant with a wooden face slowly walked in. He held a tray in his hand and slowly served up several cups of tea. "This is tea. Our Byzantium does not produce this tea. It has always come from the sea merchants of the Lantis. Teacher loved to drink this tea when he was alive. It tastes bitter in the mouth but has a sweet aftertaste. Teacher loved it." The girl smiled gently. "General Shea, please have a taste." Shea sat down and looked at the cups on the table. There were 2 exquisite porcelain cups on the table. One was placed in front of him and the other was placed in front of the girl. However, there was a small silver spoon hanging beside the cup in front of the girl. There was a small round plate in the middle of the table. Several exquisite desserts were placed on it. The shape of the desserts was unique and exquisite. Seeing the desserts on the table, a strange look flashed across the girl's eyes. Seeing that Shea was about to reach out for the cup, the girl suddenly smiled. She reached out with her small hand and gently placed it on Shea's wrist. She smiled and said, "This tea has just been boiled. It is still a bit hot. Why don't you wait for it to cool down before drinking it?" Shea did not think too much about it. Instead, he looked at the desserts on the plate. He had not eaten much today. After the bumpy journey, he was feeling hungry. He casually reached out to grab one of the desserts on the plate. However, his hand had just reached out when the girl quickly moved the plate away. She raised her head and looked at the old servant standing to the side. Her expression was very normal as she said, "These desserts were left behind last night. Why are you taking them out to serve the guest? Quickly take them away and get a new one." Shea smiled and said, "It's fine. Last night is last night. I am a person who goes to war. Having a bite to eat is enough. There is no need to be so particular." He reached out to grab the desserts again. However, the girl had already gently picked up the plate and threw it to the side. She looked at the old servant and frowned. "Why aren't you going?" The old servant's expression was wooden. He nodded and turned to leave. When he passed by Shea, the old servant suddenly staggered and fell towards Shea. Shea didn't react, but the girl seemed to have already been prepared. Not waiting for the old servant's body to lean down, the girl stretched out her leg and pushed the table in front of her. The table immediately turned sideways and blocked in front of Shea. The old servant's body was blocked by the table and couldn't touch Shea's body. Without waiting for Shea to speak, the girl had already become angry and said, "How can you be so careless? General Shea is an important guest. To be so careless is simply a joke. Quickly get out." The old servant nodded repeatedly. He barely managed to stabilize his body. He took 2 steps back and straightened his back. Shea was not a fool. He had already sensed that something was wrong. When the old servant straightened his back, he heard a caw-caw sound. Following that, he saw a cold light shoot out from the old servant's waist. This cold light came out of nowhere and shot straight towards Shea's face. The girl was already prepared. She had already grabbed a tea tray and placed it in front of Shea. Ding-ding-dang-dang sounds could be heard. The tea tray was covered with countless silver needles. There were at least dozens of them. The needles were shining with a cold light. Within the silver light, there was a faint dark green. Clearly, some special medicine had been applied on them. Shea sneered. He stood up and looked coldly at the girl and the old servant. His expression was cold and his eyes were filled with killing intent. Earlier, when the girl suddenly stopped him from drinking tea, Shea had already sensed that something was wrong. After that, when she stopped him from eating some snacks, the old servant suddenly fell down and leaned on him. Shea was not a fool. How could he not sense it? However, he was a bold person. With his current abilities, he did not care about these little tricks. He was just curious. He did not know what these fellows were up to. Seeing that they were about to shed all pretense of cordiality, the girl's face turned ashen. She put down the tray filled with needles. Her pair of eyes flashed with a cold light as she stared at the old servant. "He is someone that teacher has taken a fancy to. Aren't you going too far?" The old servant's expression remained numb. However, his body had straightened up. He originally had the appearance of an old man. However, when he straightened his body, his spirit suddenly changed. His body was filled with a sharp aura and his entire being exuded a dense killing intent. "No matter what, I must kill him." The old servant shook his head. His voice was slightly hoarse and there was a strange taste to it. However, it was clear that it was a woman's voice. How was this the voice of an old man? The girl frowned. "That matter has yet to be decided. Besides, if you don't agree, no one will force you. Why do you? No, if he doesn't die, it will be an insult to me." The old servant glared fiercely at Shea. Then, he suddenly reached out with his hand to grab at his face. However, it was as though a layer of his skin had been peeled off. His old appearance had disappeared. Instead, he was holding on to a balaclava. Even his hair had been pulled off. When Shea looked again, he was completely dumbfounded. This person before him, how could he be an old servant? He had a head of purple hair and his skin was as white as snow. Half of his face was already incomparably beautiful. However, he was wearing half an iron mask. Half of his face, which should have been devastatingly beautiful, was covered up. His pair of eyes were shockingly purple in color. There was a strange beauty to them. The pair of purple eyes stared fiercely at Shea. "You are Vaya." Shea took a deep breath and a look of surprise appeared on his face. "I recognize you. You saved me once. You saved me once from Hastings." Vaya bit her lips and glared fiercely at Shea. She said coldly, "If I had known that you would humiliate me like this, why would I have saved you back then? Shea, thunder, go to hell." After saying that, Via's hand flickered and a thin blade suddenly appeared between her thumb and index finger. Her figure abruptly rushed toward Shea. The blade flashed with a cold light as it slashed toward Shea's neck. "Stop!" The freckled girl flew to stand before Shea. She spread open her arms and used her body to shield Shea. She shouted, "Vaya! Stop!" Vaya had already slashed out with his blade. Seeing that the girl was right before him, the blade nearly grazed her face before he finally retracted it. Via's face turned cold and he said in a low voice, "Sophie, must you stop me? Just now I almost killed you." The girl shook her head and said, "No. No matter what, he is someone that teacher has set his eyes on. Teacher has great expectations for him. He must not die. Vaya, do you dare disobey teacher's orders?" Via's face was cloudy and uncertain. There was a hint of struggle in his eyes. At that moment, Junker, who was behind Vaya, had quietly moved forward. He was about to grab Via's shoulder when Vaya sensed it. He suddenly twisted his body and slammed his shoulder into Junker's chest. Via's ability was amazing. Back then, he was able to rescue Shea from Hastings. Although Hastings had held back, to be able to go against Hastings, his ability was naturally not something that could be measured by an ordinary expert. Junker was not weak, but he was not Via's opponent. When Vaya slammed into his chest, his body shrank back. Then, Vaya placed his hand on Junker's chest. In an instant, his palm turned into a fist and he gently punched 3 times. With a bang, Junker's body was sent flying. He slammed into the wall behind him and could no longer stand up. "No. Today, no matter what, I must kill him. After killing him, I will commit suicide as an apology." Via's face was ashen and there was a look of determination on his face. Shea was confused. He did not know whether to laugh or cry. In fact, with Shea's current strength, why would he need this girl to protect him? Although Via's move earlier was sharp, in Shea's opinion, it was not a big threat to him. However, this Vaya had saved him once. Now, it seemed as though he had an irreconcilable hatred with him. His face was filled with murderous intent, which made him somewhat confused. Can I say something?" Shea could not help but poke his head out from behind the girl. He scratched his head and smiled bitterly. "Miss Vaya, I don't remember offending you. Why are you doing this?" The girl suddenly turned her head and looked at Shea in surprise. Via's eyes were cold as he stared at Shea. "To be honest, I really don't remember offending you. I am very grateful for your kindness back then." Shea rubbed his hands. "If there is any misunderstanding, can't we just talk it out? What do you think?" The girl tried to hold it in. In the end, she could not hold it in any longer. "Shea, you really don't know the reason?" "I don't know." Shea shook his head. Do you know who Vaya is?" The girl had a strange expression on her face. Shea thought for a moment. "She should be the old man's disciple, right? However, I really didn't offend her." "You didn't offend me." Vaya suddenly went mad. She pointed the blade at Shea and shouted angrily. "You bastard! You dare to ask to marry me in front of so many people. Now, everyone in the imperial capital knows that you want to marry me. What kind of person am I, Vaya? How can I marry a bastard like you? If I don't kill you today, how can I face others in the future?" Wait. When did I say I want to marry?" Shea waved his hands. However, halfway through his words, a thought suddenly flashed through his mind. He stared at Vaya with widened eyes. You. Damn it. I understand. You are. Even if Shea was an idiot, he should have understood by now. Back then, when he first met Vaya, this woman suddenly appeared and saved him from Hastings. At that time, he remembered this woman saying, she had already paid back what she owed Adric. Faintly, this woman seemed to be related to Adric. Shea also knew that Vaya was once Adric's personal guard captain. And now, she was saying that he wanted to marry her? Even if Shea was an idiot, he would still be able to figure it out. You are Adric's daughter? Country Bumpkin felt as though his eyeballs were about to fall out. To be continued. If you want to know what will happen, please go to www.chidian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 491. GOR Chapter 452. I am inferior to you, 7,000 words. Shea was quick to realize the seriousness of this matter. Clearly, he had gotten himself into trouble. Purple hair, purple eyes, a mysterious aura, powerful martial skills, cold and aloof. These were the impressions that Shea had of Vaya. Back then, when he first met this woman, she had dared to attack Hastings. Additionally, there were hints that she was on par with Hastings. In terms of imposing manner, she was in no way inferior. Such a woman had a strange charm. It was obvious that her temper was tough and unyielding to the extreme. Although Wea was also a beautiful woman, at least in Shea's heart, he would never have any other thoughts about such a woman. Such a powerful woman would not trigger any wild thoughts. Whenever he thought of this woman, he would only feel one thing: danger. Powerful and dangerous. And she just so happened to be Adric's daughter. That was enough to cause Shea to scratch his head. Shea's memory was quite good. At the very least, he could clearly remember that after Vaya had rescued him, Vaya had said to him, she had already repaid what she owed Adric. Her tone was filled with resentment, at the very least. Judging from her tone, the relationship between Vaya and Adric was definitely not one of harmony. Originally, this matter had nothing to do with Shea. No matter how bad the relationship between her and Adaric was, she was still Adaric's daughter. F***ck. Don't even mention that she was Adaric's daughter, even if she was the Emperor's woman, even if she was the daughter of the Odin Divine Emperor, she still wouldn't have any relationship with him. And yet, at present, son of a bitch. That damned fatso. He has caused me so much harm. Shea cried out in grief and indignation. No wonder when that damned fatso talked about Adric's daughter, he had a sneaky look on his face. He had never explained who Adric's daughter was. So, this was the reason. That damned fatso must have known that this matter would be too difficult to handle. Thus, he deliberately hid it from me. More importantly, judging by the murderous look on Via's face, even an idiot would know that this big Miss Via was greatly dissatisfied with this marriage. Originally, Shea did not care if Adric's daughter was willing to get married or not. It was for the best if she did not want to get married. Lao Tzu did not want to marry her. However, this matter was a problem for Via. Miss Via, can you listen to me for a moment? Shea frowned miserably. Naturally, Shea was not afraid of fighting and killing. If it were someone else who dared to assassinate Shea, Shea would have long since stabbed that person with a flaming fork. However, the person before him was Via. Putting aside her identity as Adric's daughter, she had saved his life back then. Shea's character was not that great. He was far from the standard of a gentleman. However, Shea had one good trait. He would never be ungrateful. She had once saved his little life. Repaying kindness with enmity, Shea couldn't do it no matter what. Speak. Via's face was ashen. She did not put down the thin blade in her hand and continued to point it at Shea. I want to hear what you have to say. Gulp. Shea struggled to swallow her saliva. She stretched her neck and blinked her eyes. There was a pitiful look on her face as she said, "That If I were to tell you that this is all a misunderstanding, would you believe me? Vaya did not say anything. Seeing that Chen Xiaoyan was not saying anything, Shea assumed that there was still a chance to turn the situation around. She quickly explained that, when I proposed to General Adric, I did not know that you are his daughter. The blade in Via's hand flashed and the murderous look on her face did not diminish in the slightest. Let's just drop this matter. What do you think? Shea gave a wry smile. At this moment, be it the path of retreat or the development of their forces, the righteous words that Fatso had said to Shea were thrown to the back of her mind. Via simply refused to marry him. No matter how incompetent she was, she could not do something as despicable as forcing her to marry him. Let's just forget about this marriage. Ha ha. Via sneered and said, forget about it? Shaya, do you think this matter can be settled so easily with just a few words? I will take the initiative to break off the engagement. I would never dare to marry you. Is that fine? Via appeared even angrier and she said, break off the engagement. Humph. You want to let the world know that you, Shea, proposed to me first. Then, you refused to marry me and broke off the engagement after that. You want to make me, Via, a laughingstock. Shea's scalp went numb and she said, you don't want me to break off the engagement. Do you want me to marry you? Before he could finish his words, the murderous look on Via's face soared. She suddenly pounced forward and slashed down with her blade. Via's pounce was swift and violent. Although the girl was in front of her, she was still blocked by Via with one step. The blade of her blade was already at Shea's neck. Shea quickly retreated. Via's figure was like a ghost. He was practically right next to Shea and the blade of his blade was not far from Shea's throat. Shea took 3 steps back but was unable to dodge Via. Helpless, he raised his hand and gently flicked the blade of Via's blade. With a whung sound, Shea's finger landed on the blade of the blade. The thin blade suddenly bent and the blade emitted a faint but concentrated vibration. Via felt a heat in his hand. The thin short blade was on the verge of flying out of his hand. He could not help but let out a grunt. Via's reaction was quick. Seeing the blade flying out of his hand, he raised his left leg and bent his knee. Then, he slammed his knee into Shea's lower abdomen. Shea gave an "I-O" and reached out with one hand. His palm pressed down on Via's knee. Via's knee strike was blocked. Immediately, he felt a burning sensation coming from the knee that Shea was pressing down on. Feeling a faint pain, he subconsciously took a step back. Shea blocked the attack and watched as Via retreated. Just as he was about to say something, he suddenly saw a trace of killing intent flash across Via's eyes. His heart turned cold and he suddenly felt a gust of wind blowing in front of him. With a "pew" sound, a burst of flames shot out from Via's waist. The burst of flames broke through his clothes. Within the burst of flames were several sharp blades. It was unknown what kind of weapon it was, but it shot out. At this moment, the distance between the two of them was only 2 or 3 steps. At such a close distance, the burst of flames from the blades was comparable to a crossbow. If it was an ordinary person, no matter how agile they would not be able to dodge it. Via's attack was a killing move. Seeing that burst of flames was about to hit Shea's body, Shea suddenly took a deep breath. His chest and abdomen suddenly swelled up. Facing the burst of flames, he fiercely spat out a burst of air. Break! With a series of tinkling sounds, countless fragments of blades fell to the ground. The burst of flames was also extinguished by Shea's burst of air. Via's face was gloomy. Seeing that Shea had blocked her sure-hit killing move, her eyes became more and more furious. Suddenly, she bent her body and pulled out a black short arrow from who knows where. Holding it in her hand, she straightened her body and stabbed towards Shea. For a moment, the two of them once again intertwined. Although Via's movements were fast and violent, a series of ping-ping-pang-pang-pang sounds could be heard. Both of them were extremely fast. In an instant they had already exchanged 7 or 8 blows. Over and over again, Shea could be heard shouting, "I can't even cancel the engagement. What do you want me to do?" Vaya did not utter a word. She only attacked fiercely. However, what shocked her was that no matter how powerful her killing moves were, her opponent could easily block them. When did this Shea fellow's strength reach such a level? Only a year ago, this fellow had fallen into Hastings's hands. He had to rely on her to save him. At that time, this Shea's strength was undoubtedly far inferior to her. But now, she was attacking fiercely while her opponent's defense was watertight. He even had the leisure to talk to her. Obviously, he had yet to display his true strength. Wei Yu was startled, and his movements inevitably slowed down a little. Shea received a few more blows. Finding an opening, he retreated a few steps and arrived at the door. After putting some distance between them, Shea shouted, "Enough! I'm not fighting anymore. I have already said that I want to cancel the engagement. What else do you want me to do? If you cancel the engagement, you will make me the laughingstock of everyone. Then Lao Tzu wants to marry you and you don't want to." Shea was a little angry at this moment. "Bah! You bastard, who wants to marry you?" Vaya was furious. "You don't want me to cancel the engagement and you don't want me to marry you. What do you want Lao Tzu to do? Tell me." Shea stretched his neck. "Unless you die." Vaya gritted his teeth. "If you die, the engagement will naturally be cancelled." Shea was so angry that he almost bit his own tongue. Damn, he really won't give up until he dies? Aha. Then I'm very sorry, but I can't agree to the condition you're talking about. Lao Tzu is living a comfortable life. He doesn't want to die so early. Shea was so angry that he laughed. At this moment, since everyone had reached a deadlock, he simply turned around and walked out of the room. He said loudly, "I'm not going to argue with you. Lao Tzu is afraid of you. I'll avoid you." Vaya actually stopped and stared at Shea with a gloomy face. I also know that you don't want to die. Shea, this matter has already come to this. You and I won't rest until one of us is dead. Either you die or I die." Shea shook his head. "You can't beat me. I think we should just forget about this matter." Via's face was pale. He looked at Shea and suddenly raised the short arrow in his hand. He shouted sternly, "That's right. Your strength has increased by leaps and bounds. I'm no longer your opponent. But Shea, remember this. I, Vaya, am the best at assassination. As long as I'm alive, I won't let you go. If we fight face to face, I won't be your opponent. Naturally, I'll secretly find an opportunity to kill you. In the future, you'd better be on guard against me at all times. Whether it's eating or sleeping, you'd better be careful. Even when you're sleeping, I might stab you from the side. If you're afraid, you'd better kill me now. Otherwise, I won't let you go." Shea's scalp went numb. However, if he wanted to kill Vaya, he would never do it. He suppressed the anger in his heart and snorted. He turned around and strode away. Shea had inexplicably eaten such anger, and the stuffy feeling in his heart was extremely uncomfortable. Lowering his head, he walked out of the house in large strides. After taking a few steps, he heard hurried footsteps behind him. Turning his head to look, he saw the freckled girl running all the way to catch up with him. "Why are you chasing after me?" Shea's face was ashen. "Don't tell me you're planning to make me stay." As he spoke, Shea pressed down on the flaming fork on his waist. He couldn't make a move on Vaya due to their past kindness. However, this girl in front of him didn't have any misgivings. If she really angered Shea, he wouldn't care if she was Cavishier's disciple or not. He wouldn't hesitate to use his flaming fork on her. As for the other party being a woman, TSK, Master Shea was never a person who would show mercy to women. The girl's face was amiable. She caught up with Shea. However, her expression calmed down. She looked at Shea's flaming fork and smiled. "General Shea, Why are you angry with me? The one who wants to kill you is Vaya, not me. TSK. I think you're all in cahoot. Shea said angrily. You brought me here today. Humph, maybe this was all arranged by you. The girl had a good temper. She said lightly, I don't care about the matter between you and Vaya. However, I don't think it's a big deal. Vaya can't beat you anyway. You just have to be more careful in the future. Damn it, how can you guard against thieves for 1,000 days? Shea shook his head. Lao Tzu can only hide far away. The girl covered her mouth and smiled. All right, I caught up with you because I wanted to ask when General Shea plans to return to the north? I have to wait for the Emperor to summon me, Shea said casually. However, he suddenly thought of something. He looked at the girl with vigilance. Why are you asking this? The girl said slowly, General Shea, please tell me when you plan to leave so that I can make preparations in advance. Otherwise, I won't have time to pack up when I leave. Teacher left behind a lot of books. I have to pack them up and transport them along the way. I also have to be careful. If teacher's belongings are damaged, it will be very distressing. Shea's eyes became more vigilant. Leave? What leave? What does it have to do with you when I leave? The girl smiled calmly. General Shea, you must be joking. When you return to the north, I will naturally go with you. Shea stared at the girl with his eyes wide open. Are you surprised? The girl frowned and shook her head. Teacher thought highly of you and threw you to the north to train. Now, it seems that you have done very well. You have struggled all the way and even exceeded teacher's initial expectations. It can be seen that teacher has a good eye for people. Since you are the one chosen by teacher, from now on we, the disciples left behind by teacher, will have to follow you and contribute to your cause. Sir, why do you have to make such a surprised expression? Follow me. Shea really opened his mouth wide this time. The girl looked at Shea and nodded slowly. Of course. Shea took a deep breath and shook his head. Forget it. The situation in the north is chaotic, and it is far from peaceful. You are such a delicate girl, why would you follow me to the north? You can't carry anything with your shoulders or your hands. The conditions in the north are harsh. If there is a war, I will not have the energy to take care of you. Pausing for a moment, Shea pointed at the house and said, Take this house as a gift from me. You can just stay here peacefully. It can also be considered as a friendship between fellow disciples. After saying that, Shea turned to leave. He had only taken 2 steps when he suddenly heard the girl behind him say something with a faint smile. Sir, are you looking down on me? Do you think I am useless? Shea felt a little embarrassed. His thoughts had been seen through by the other party. He could only stop and turn to smile bitterly. You don't have to be so harsh. The North is still a war-torn world. Why would a girl like you want to join in the fun? The imperial capital has just settled down. You should just stay here. Didn't you get a house full of books from the old man? You can stay here and study peacefully. After saying that, Shea turned to leave again. He heard the girl say something softly. General Shea, don't regret it. Her tone was understated. But when Shea heard it, his heart skipped a beat. He suddenly thought of something. This girl's temperament is different from ordinary people. She is unfathomable. Even if she looks like a delicate girl, she is still Cavishier's disciple. It is hard to say if there is something special about her. He took a deep breath and said, Oh, why don't you tell me? The girl smiled and said, Teacher's disciples are all carefully selected by him. Teacher is very knowledgeable. It is a pity that we are incompetent. We cannot learn from him. When teacher trained us, each of us learned different things. Sister Weya, for example, had learned how to spy and assassinate. In this field, Sister Vaya can be considered the best in the world. There is no second person. In addition, General Jean-Claude studied military strategy and warfare. Although he hasn't been with Master for long, he was able to train such an elite Dark Knight Imperial Forest. This ability can't be bad. Shea's heart was indeed shaken. That Vaya, forget it. The other party's eyes are red and he wants to stab me. Shea did not expect to take him for his own use. That Junker is a very useful person. If he can train the elites of the Dark Knight Imperial Forest, if he is brought back to the army, he will naturally be able to train the elite. This kind of talent is very useful no matter where he is placed. Then what about you? Shea looked at the girl. Although his heart was somewhat disapproving, he had already made up his mind. Even if this girl is useless, with Junker as a useful person, it is not a loss to raise her. Even if this girl is useless, with Junker as a useful person, it is not a loss to raise an idle person. A girl like her, even if she does not work every day, she will not make Shea poor. I am much worse. The girl smiled shyly and said lightly, I was born with a weak physique, so I can't practice martial arts. Therefore, I can't learn the skills of Sister Wea, and naturally, I'm not good at things like spying and assassination. My body is also spoiled, and I am greedy for peace and happiness. I cannot endure the hardships in the army, so I cannot learn the skills of a general like Junker. However, fortunately, I have always had a good memory. Since I was young, I have studied a lot, so I am willing to put in some effort. Astronomy, geography, national politics, I can be considered to have learned a little. The situation of the world can be considered to have a good understanding of it. I can barely analyze a little bit of it. When Shea heard this, he was somewhat amused. What astronomy and geography? Such a girl, who looks to be about the same age as him, to say that she is erudite would be too much of an exaggeration. Listening to her, it seems that she has read a lot of books. She is probably a bookworm. As for listening to her, it seems that she knows a little bit of everything. Shea understood that there are 99 out of 100 people like her. They are just people who talk empty talk. Forget it. Considering that we are from the same sect, and that Junker has some value, I will bring this girl along and treat her as an idler. Well, since that is the case, before I return to the north, I will send someone to inform you. However, let's make things clear first. You and Junker will go back with me. As for that Vaya, the girl pursed her lips and smiled. She did not mind Shea's attitude of looking down on her. She smiled and said, Don't worry, Sister Vaya will be leaving today. When we set out, she will not be with us. Shea nodded and felt relieved. He then said his goodbyes again. After leaving the house, he went to the door and saw the carriage parked outside. The coachman was the young Duke, Rhodey. Come up, I will send you back to the city. Rhodey sat there but refused to look at Shea. His tone was cold as he said, Without me sending you back, you will not be able to enter the city. Shea knew that the other party was prejudiced against him. He gave a wry smile and said, Thank you, brother. He got on the carriage, but he did not enter the carriage. Instead, he turned around and sat beside the coachman's seat, right beside Roddy. Roddy glanced at Shea and frowned. Shea smiled and said, It is too stuffy to be alone in the carriage. It is better to sit here and chat with you. It will help pass the time. Rhodey did not want to waste time with Shea. He raised his whip and shouted as he slowly drove the carriage. The carriage went down the mountain and went along the road to Osgilla City. Along the way, Shea deliberately tried to get Rhodey to talk, but Rhodey ignored him. Later on, Shea felt helpless and said, Young Duke, I know that you feel injustice for Adeline. However, Shea, will say one thing today. I will not do anything to let her down. If I lie, then I will die by the sword. Rhodey then looked at Shea and said, Then, about you marrying General Adric's daughter. Don't mention it. Shea smiled bitterly and said, Lao Tzu was schemed against and suffered a loss. You should think about it for me. Even if you lend me the courage, would I dare to marry a woman like Vaya? When Rhodey heard this, he remembered Via's character and felt that it was reasonable. He could not help but calm down a little. If that is the case, then why did you? Shea shook his head and said, this matter is too complicated to explain. My relationship with General Adric is also not something that can be explained in 1 or 2 sentences. You and I do not know each other well. In short, I will tell you this. This matter is not what you think it is. When Rhodey heard this, he looked deeply at Shea and lightly said, I hope what you said is true. Shea, a real man, standing in this world, the matter of betraying kindness is the most despicable. Back then, when you were still a penniless guy, Adeline fell in love with you. Now that you have a high position and power, if you were to betray her, are you still a man? Shea nodded and said, I also think so. There is no need to talk about this matter anymore. Rhodey was still skeptical, but his attitude towards Shea was much better. Along the way, the two of them chatted casually. Rhodey asked about the war in the north and Shea answered him one by one. Both of them were real men. When Rhodey heard about the war in the north from Shea, his blood boiled. He could not help but say, this time, after the matter in the imperial capital is over, I must ask my father to let me leave home. I also want to go to the north and do a good job. In such a great era, if a real man does not throw himself into it, then I would have lived in vain. Shea smiled and said, if you want to come, you might as well come to my place. After all, we are fellow disciples. You and I are both Cavishier's disciples. If you come to my place, if I don't help you, who else can I help? After laughing, Shea rolled his eyes and said, speaking of teacher's disciple, what is that girl's background? She is so young but already has an unfathomable appearance. She seems to have imitated most of the old man's appearance. Being with her reminds me of the time when I first met the old man. Are you talking about Sophie? Rhodey's expression turned cold as he said, teacher's disciples, there are many of them. However, Sophie is teacher's most trusted and favorite disciple. She has also been by teacher's side for the longest time. Naturally, she has also learned the most from teacher. She has always been extremely intelligent, and we all admire her very much. Shea was curious. That girl is not even as old as you and me. She can't carry anything with her hands or shoulders. Even if she has read a few more books, is she really as capable as you say? Rhodey curiously looked at Shea. He hesitated for a moment and then said, back then, teacher had evaluated the disciples. When he talked about Sophie, he pointed at her and said, if we are talking about military strategy, you are not as good as the male disciples. In terms of martial skills, he was the weakest among all the disciples. However, if one were to talk about the most promising disciple in the future, none of the other disciples could compare to her. It's a pity that she's a woman, and I'm afraid it'll be difficult for her to display her talents. Oh? Such a high evaluation? Shaya was a little surprised. That's not all. Rhodey smiled. He then looked stern and solemnly said, at that time, teacher pointed at Sophie in front of us and said, when it comes to planning for the country, I am not as good as you. If you can become an official as a man, I'm afraid that in the future, the position of the 10 great ministers in the history of the empire will be rewritten. Shea, to be continued. If you want to know what will happen, please go to www.chidian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 492. I am not as good as you. I am not as good as you. If someone else were to say such an evaluation, it would not be a big deal. However, the person who said this was Cavishier. It was Cavishier who was extremely intelligent. It was Cavishier who won the trust of the emperor and held the power of the empire for decades. It was Cavishier who was feared by the nobles of the empire like a tiger. For such a person to say, I am not as good as you, what kind of praise was that? With this kind of shock, Shea recalled that he had treated Roddy as an idler. He could not help but feel embarrassed and his face became hot. Roddy's carriage was very fast and they arrived at Osgilla in the middle of the night. At that time, the guards in the city had already taken over the Acropolis around Osgilla. The defensive area had also gradually expanded and there was an endless amount of patrolling cavalry. It was said that in order to strengthen his control over the Acropolis, Adrik had established a large defensive area around Osgilla that covered the entire administrative district of the imperial capital. He had gathered all the horses that he could find and organized a battalion of patrolling cavalry to travel between the Acropolis and Osgilla. They patrolled day and night and the scouts were very strict. This move had indeed strengthened his control over the entire Osgilla region. After all, Adrik was a cavalry general and was naturally proficient in the use of cavalry. The carriage traveled all the way to Osgilla. During the night, they met 2 patrolling cavalry scouts. These scouts were the elites that Adrik had handpicked. Some of them were even young students from the imperial capital's military academy. These young people were at the most hot-blooded age and were filled with thoughts of serving the country. They were also the most hard-working when carrying out missions. The patrolling cavalry that they met along the way closely inspected Roddy and Shea. Even when Roddy revealed his identity as the Duke of the Minas family, the patrolling cavalry did not let their guard down. However, when the young patrolling cavalrymen found out about Shea's identity, they were in awe. Compared to Roddy, their attitude was even more respectful. Recently, Shea had been in the limelight. He had led his troops from thousands of miles away to reinforce the imperial capital and rescue the king. Moreover, he had annihilated an elite corps of the Odin Empire. He was the #1 general of the Empire's younger generation and was the idol of these hot-blooded youngsters. In comparison, although Roddy was a small duke of the Minas family, the Minas family did not have any outstanding performance in this war. It was inevitable that he would be overshadowed. When the 2 of them returned to the imperial capital, Roddy naturally took care of the people guarding the gate. After calling for the gate to be opened, Roddy personally sent Shea back to his residence and then left. When Roddy left, he had an indignant look on his face. It was likely that the attitude of the young cavalrymen that they met along the way had touched the young duke. If it was in the past, the Minas family was the most prestigious family in the army. As a small duke, he would naturally be the #1 figure in the eyes of the young officers. However, in this war, the Minas family had been hiding their strength and biding their time. At this moment, even Shea Thunder, who came from a humble background, was far better than him in the eyes of the young cavalryman. Roddy could imagine how he felt. Shea naturally noticed Roddy's expression. However, he did not say anything. When they parted, he only patted Roddy's shoulder to comfort him. As a man, he naturally understood Roddy's grievances. Roddy had a strong family background and was capable. However, he had not made any achievements so far. As a good man, it was natural for him to feel depressed. After sending Roddy off, Shea returned to his residence. However, he suddenly remembered something. He summoned a personal guard and gave him a few instructions. He ordered the guard to leave the city early in the morning and send 200 war horses to the imperial capital. Along the way, he saw Adrik's patrolling cavalrymen. Although the young cavalrymen were full of vigor, the quality of the war horses made him speechless. The imperial capital had gone through the torment of the rebel army and there was a shortage of horses. Even the imperial horses in the imperial palace had been contributed. However, Adrik still did not have enough war horses. Most of the horses used by the cavalrymen were old and weak. They were too ugly. As an old subordinate of Adrik, Shea wanted to share his old superior's burden by sending some war horses. He believed that Adrik's furrowed brows would relax a little. That night, Shea had a good night's sleep and rejuvenated his spirit. The next morning, when he woke up, a personal guard came to inform him that the imperial palace had sent an envoy. The envoy had arrived early in the morning and had been waiting outside for a long time. Shea heard this and smiled coldly. Garcia, after holding on for a few days, has he finally lost his cool? In fact, the young emperor's state of mind was conflicted. The conflict with Shea made him afraid of Shea. As a result, the emperor was unwilling to give Shea those rewards. He had delayed for a few days to deliberately put on airs and reduce Shea's prestige. However, the problem was that the Lantis army was still stationed in the city. A foreign army was openly stationed in the capital of their own country. The dream of the Lantis people for many years was right in front of them. Moreover, they were stationed in another country's capital. The Lantis people were really arrogant. At this moment, Byzantium had a favor to ask of Lantis. Lantis generals and generals were all putting on airs when facing Garcia's emperor. Especially the Lantis general led by Gisland. Even when he had an audience with Garcia, he was still carefree. These days, he had even made a lot of rude requests. This made the emperor lower his head. Speaking of which, after Shea and the 10,000 cavalrymen of the Besta military district arrived, the arrogance of the Lantis people weakened slightly. It seemed that he had to thank Shea. From this point of view, Garcia did not dare to leave Shea in the cold for too long. If he put on airs for too long, Shea's temper would rise and he would really leave in a huff. If he brought the army north and returned, the Lantis people would see him as a joke. If they knew that there was internal conflict within the empire, the greedy Lantis people would probably open their mouths and make a lot of demands. Garcia held on for a few days. Just last night, Gisland and the Lantis people sent people into the imperial palace again. It was said that the meeting with the emperor was very unpleasant. After the meeting with Gisland and the others, the emperor angrily smashed a table in the study. Before dawn, he finally sent someone to summon Shea for an audience. Shea met the messenger from the imperial palace. Naturally, he did not know what had happened in the imperial palace last night. The messenger from the imperial palace was neither servile nor overbearing. After conveying the emperor's summons, he urged Shea to go to the imperial palace immediately. After being ignored by the emperor for a few days, Shea was also a little angry. After hearing the messenger's order, he said that he needed to change clothes and freshen up, and asked the messenger to wait in the living room. Uncle Shea went back to his room and had a good sleep. After more than an hour, he got up again. Then he practiced martial arts in the yard for a while, took a bath, shaved, trimmed his hair, and had a good breakfast. When Uncle Shea finished everything and put on a brand new general's uniform and came out to meet the messenger from the imperial palace, it was almost noon. The messenger from the imperial palace was already sweating profusely and his face was pale. Who dared to deliberately neglect an audience with the emperor like Shea did when he was summoned by the emperor? Fortunately, the messenger came from the imperial palace, so he knew a little about the current situation in the empire. He understood that General Shea was now in a high position and had a powerful army. Even the emperor had to show some respect to him. He also vaguely knew that the emperor seemed to be at odds with General Shea. He did not dare to say anything about Shea's public neglect. He just humbled himself and kept urging Shea to go to the imperial palace. Since Shea had vented his anger, he did not want to make things difficult for this insignificant person. He gave the order to set off. He rode a horse and set off for the imperial palace with dozens of personal guards. When Shea set off, he was accompanied by the elite cavalry of the army. They walked on the streets of the imperial capital in a marching posture. The dozens of personal guards scattered out in front. The vanguard of the 10-man squad was responsible for opening the way. The 20 guards in the middle surrounded Shea, and another 10 stayed behind to bring up the rear. Escorted by a large retinue, they slowly walked on the streets of the imperial capital. After walking like this for the time it took to eat a meal, they finally approached the imperial palace. However, just as they were about to reach the imperial palace, something happened. The group of horses was still moving forward when two riders suddenly turned around from afar. The rider rushed to Shea's side and reported loudly, "Sir, there is a group of carriages coming toward us. They are flying the envoy flag of the Lantis." Hearing that, Shea did not react. He simply uttered an "oh." The rider then added, "The other party has a lot of carriages and horses. The street is narrow and the two sides are unable to make space." So, the expression on Shea's face immediately changed. He looked at the rider and asked, "What is it?" "Our vanguard and the other party are blocking the street entrance. The other party wants us to make way," the rider quickly replied. "Make way." Shea's face remained unchanged. He looked at the rider and asked, "Where are your men?" "Our brothers are confronting the other party at the street entrance." Motherf ** Ker, when have we ever given way to anyone when we run amok under the heavens? The cavalrymen shouted loudly. "Good." Shea nodded with satisfaction. As they spoke, the group of people had already arrived at the street entrance. The street entrance was originally 7 to 8 meters wide. The streets in the imperial capital were already considered wide. This intersection was also wide enough for two carriages to pass side by side. However, there were many people on both sides of the road. With them squeezed together, the narrow street was unable to make space. If one party wanted to pass, they would have to make way for the other party. At the street entrance, the group of carriages flying the banner of the Lantis had a luxurious large carriage in the middle. Dozens of Lantis warriors were lined up at the front of the group. They were already in a standoff with Shea's cavalry. Both sides had swords in their hands and they looked like they were going to give a needle to an awl. Shea's group had already arrived in front of the group of people. When they saw the situation in front of them, they snorted coldly. At this moment, an officer ran out from the Lantis group and shouted, "The Lantis envoy group is here. My general has orders for the people in front to make way." Shea raised his brows when he heard this. He said indifferently, "Ignore him. Get our brothers to line up." His order was passed down, and the dozens of cavalrymen immediately began to move. On this street, the cavalrymen immediately got into a charging stance, and the personal guards all grabbed their lances. For a moment, the cavalrymen raised their lances and faced the Lantis convoy head-on. Seeing the actions of Shea's subordinates, the officer's complexion immediately changed. The Lantis warriors beside him also began to clamor loudly, and some of them even began to shout loudly. "The Byzantium people are so rude. Damn it, they have a favor to ask of our Lantis, yet they are still so arrogant. Let's kill them. I don't think their emperor will dare to say anything. What's there to be arrogant about? If not for the help of our Lantis people, their country would have been destroyed long ago." Shea's cavalrymen did not move in the face of the other party's ruckus. They were not bothered by the other party's ruckus. The cavalrymen calmly got into formation and pointed their lances at the Lantis group. When the Lantis officer saw this, he turned around and ran back to the middle carriage. He seemed to have said something to the carriage before he turned around and shouted, "Our general has just returned from an audience with your country's emperor. Your country's emperor has acknowledged our general's status as an ambassador in Osgilla. The people in front, please do not make a mistake. Quickly make way. Otherwise, it will affect the friendship between our two countries. I'm afraid it won't be good." When he shouted, Shea's cavalrymen did not move. These cavalrymen were all veterans. Without Shea's orders, they treated the people in front of them as air. When Shea heard the other parties shout, he yawned and turned around to whisper something to one of his personal guards. When the personal guard heard this, a valiant look appeared on his face, and he rode his horse to the front. At this moment, the distance between the two parties was less than 10 steps. The personal guard rode his horse to the front of the formation and pointed at the Lantis group opposite him and shouted coldly, "General Shea thunder orders. Get lost. Get lost?" When the words came out, the Lantis group was stunned. They had seen valiant and domineering people, but they had never seen such a valiant and domineering person. Get lost. He actually asked the distinguished ambassador of the Lantis Empire to get lost? Even the Emperor of the Byzantine Empire, the Prime Minister of the Byzantine Empire, and the famous General Audiobook, had to follow the etiquette in front of their generals. This General Shea Thunder on the other side actually asked us to get lost? After a brief moment of shock, the entire Lantis group quickly became noisy. Some were shouting, and some were waving their swords in an attempt to fight. Shea sat on his horse and coldly observed the movements of the Lantis group. His face did not show any signs of excitement. Instead, he looked bored. He covered his mouth and yawned before saying indifferently, "Go and shout. Give them 10 breaths of time to consider whether or not to retreat. If anyone dares to come over and collide with our group, kill them immediately." The last sentence of "kill them immediately" scared the palace messenger, who had been following Shea, so much that his face turned pale. The palace messenger nearly blacked out and fell off his horse. My God, kill them at will? Is this Shea Thunder crazy? The other side is the ambassador of the Lantis Empire. This Shea actually dares to be so domineering? Shea glanced at the palace messenger and chuckled. He patted the poor fellow's trembling shoulder and said indifferently, "Don't worry. Not only will the Emperor not punish you for what I have done here, he will even be secretly happy." After Shea's words were shouted over, the Lantis group became even more restless. Some of the officers could no longer restrain their warriors. Some of the Lantis group could not help but take a few steps forward. At this moment, the window of the middle carriage suddenly opened. A hand reached out and summoned the Lantis officer who was outside. The officer seemed to whisper a few words. When the officer came over, his face became incomparably strange. He took a deep breath and shouted weakly, "The general has ordered. Everyone, line up, turn around." Boom! The group suddenly became noisy. The officer shouted again and again, barely managing to subdue the situation. The faces of the Lantis group were filled with indignation. Some could not help but curse. On Shea's side, the group of cavalry remained as steady as a rock. Shea was at the back of the group. He sat on his horse and dug his ears out of boredom. The Lantis group on the other side finally moved slowly. The guards of the Lantis group finally retreated. After waiting for a while, the path was cleared and the guards of the Lantis group lined up on the side of the road. The carriage naturally stopped by the side of the road and opened up a path for Shea's group to move forward. On Shea's side, the cavalry did not appear to be agitated at all. In the eyes of these experienced elites, it was as though the other side giving way to them was a matter of course. They had followed their general through all the wars, running amok under the heavens. How could they give way to others? What Ambassador Lantis? In the eyes of these cavalrymen, he was nothing more than a cat or a dog. He could not even be compared to a finger of General Shea's. After the Lantis group opened up a path, the cavalrymen immediately lined up and moved forward. The cavalrymen sat on their horses, not even bothering to glance at the Lantis group beside them. Their arrogance could not be any more arrogant. Shea rode his horse through the intersection. When he passed by the carriage that was parked by the side of the road, Shea's heart skipped a beat. He could clearly feel a pair of bright eyes quietly sizing him up from behind the window of the carriage. Shea could not be bothered to pay attention to it. He simply raised his head and puffed out his chest. The cavalrymen passed by the Lantis group and slowly moved forward. Then, the officer from the Lantis group caught up with them. After receiving a nod from Shea, this officer from the Lantis group came to Shea's side. General Shea Thunder. This officer from the Lantis group did his best to straighten his body and put on a tough look. "My general has a message for me." Shea snorted. "Speak." Our general said. "Firstly, out of respect for your distinguished service, Secondly, out of consideration for the cooperation and friendship between our two families, he made way for you. However, I would like to give you a word of advice. As a general, you must not be too domineering. Being too domineering is the path to disaster. Our general would like to offer you these words. Please consider it. After saying that, this officer from the Lantis group stood up with his head held high. He raised his chin and looked at Shea. A look of disdain flashed across Shea's eyes. He sighed softly. Just this? TSK, I thought he would send you here to tell me something. Since that is the case, you should also pass on my message to that whatever general of yours. After saying that, Shea took a deep breath. He pointed at the other party's nose and shouted. Lao Tzu is arrogant. If you have the guts, come bite me. If you don't have the guts, then F***K off. Stop blabbering like a woman. If you have the guts, come bite me? Who the F***K talks like that? That Lantis group was so angry that his face turned red. Shea ignored him and urged his horse to leave. The cavalryman followed closely behind, leaving the Lantis group standing there with a dumbfounded look on his face. Shea's domineering manner had caused the accompanying emissary to sweat profusely. His face was as pale as paper. He sat on the horse's back, his body shivering. He felt that he had the misfortune of 8 lifetimes to be assigned such a difficult task to summon such a domineering general. He could only pray silently in his heart that this would not cause any diplomatic dispute. Otherwise, if this matter was investigated, the Emperor would not do anything to this high-ranking General Shea. He was just a small emissary, and he would have to bear the blame for not handling matters well. The group of horses arrived at the palace. Shea immediately entered the palace to have an audience with the Emperor. The emissary was already on the verge of fainting. He hastily arranged for Shea and the others to enter the palace. Shea's guards naturally did not have the qualifications to have an audience with the Emperor. They were only arranged to rest in a place. Shea himself was brought to a side hall in the palace to rest and wait for the Emperor's summons. The emissary had already gone to have an audience with Garcia. Garcia had sent someone to summon Shea early in the morning. However, he waited for the entire morning. Seeing that it was already past lunchtime, Shea finally arrived. Garcia naturally had a belly full of anger. When the emissary arrived, Garcia first scolded him angrily. Then, he waited for the emissary to complete his task. The emissary trembled as he recounted what had happened on the road. After listening to the story, Garcia's originally furious face suddenly calmed down. At that moment, Garcia's thoughts were extremely complicated. Aside from his anger, there was also a feeling of carefreeness. He had already been angered by the Lantis for many days. However, at that moment, the power of the nation was inferior to theirs. Thus, he could only endure. After listening to the story of how Shea had fought with the Lantis on the road, the Emperor's heart suddenly calmed down. For a moment, he didn't know what to feel. In addition to being annoyed, a faint feeling of envy towards Shea suddenly appeared in her heart. He has guts, humph. He actually said that he has guts. Garcia gritted his teeth. That Shea dares to be so gutsy is nothing more than relying on the strength of his troops and horses. If I were in his position, I would also be more gutsy than him. At this point, the young Emperor suddenly sighed and smiled bitterly. In the past, when Mr. Cavasher was still alive, he said this. The so-called justice is nothing more than a strong army. Humph, at this moment I truly feel the truth of this sentence. Wasn't he, Shea, relying on a strong army? If I also have a strong army, why would I lower my head to others? After a pause, Garcia raised his hand. Go, summon Shea for an audience. The emissary was about to leave after receiving the order when Garcia suddenly changed his mind. Wait, there is no need to go. I will go to the side hall to receive him. The emissary was suspicious, but he could only nod his head in response. Just as he was about to turn and leave, the emperor changed his mind. No, wait. Garcia's face was cloudy and uncertain. He seemed to hesitate for a moment. Finally, he clenched his fist and said in a deep voice, "Go and ask General Shea to wait for a while. I will change into the emperor's clothes and receive him in the main hall. Pass down the order to receive him with the best gifts." These 3 orders were each more solemn than the last. The emissary was confused when he heard it. But with his status, how could he dare to ask? He quickly went to pass down the order. Garcia stood there and did his best to take a few deep breaths to calm his mind. Then, he muttered to himself, "He has guts, heh. This Shea Thunder, he really doesn't hold back when he speaks. Humph. To be continued. If you want to know what will happen, please go to www.chidian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading." Chapter 493. GOR Chapter 454 Unfathomable. The Emperor received Shea Thunder with a grand ceremony. When the main hall was opened, the procession was ready. Emperor Garcia came out in his imperial robes and greeted Shea with the most solemn and honorable ceremony. The young emperor and General Shea Thunder met in the main hall. It was said that the emperor and his subjects were respectful and the atmosphere was very friendly and harmonious. His Majesty asked about the situation in the north and praised General Shea for his meritorious deeds in the north. He was not stingy with his praises and praised General Shea Thunder as a pillar of the empire. This rumored domineering General Shea Thunder was very respectful and obedient in front of the emperor. He abided by his duties and did not have the slightest bit of arrogance in the legends. When he talked with the emperor, he also abided by the rules and did not look sideways. He had the appearance of a loyal subject. The laughter in the palace did not stop. When it came to happiness, both the emperor and his subject laughed heartily. During this time, Shea also thought about the late Emperor Cantos. His words were mournful and sincere. Even the servants standing in the palace couldn't help but feel that General Shea, who was in charge of a large number of troops, was a very good person. His attitude towards the emperor was also very good. How could such a good person be said to be so unbearable? It should be known that even General Adric, who was regarded as a loyal subject, sometimes had an unusually tough attitude when he met the emperor. This General Shea did not seem to have any temper and was very polite. It was said that this General Shea was taught by Adric. It would appear that he was much more pleasing to the eye than that scar face. Shea was born with a heroic appearance. Now that he was wearing the uniform of the empire's general, his appearance was full of heroic spirit. He was young and had good looks. At this moment, he was feeling the most proud of his life. Above the palace, some of the young female attendants who served tea and water couldn't help but steal a glance at the young noble of the Imperium. Shea was beaming with joy on the surface, but in fact, he had long been impatient to the point that his teeth were aching. With this young emperor, it was obvious that neither of them liked the other. Behind his back, he only called this emperor a rabbit, and this emperor probably had nothing good to say about him. However, when the two of them really met, they were chatting cheerfully and wittily, as if they were in harmony with each other. After talking for a long time, Shea could only wait patiently for the emperor to speak. Unexpectedly, Emperor Garcia's tone suddenly changed, as if he was careless. "I heard that just now, General Shea and Lantis had a small disagreement on the way here." When Shea heard this, he raised his eyebrows and said seriously, "Your Majesty is right." Emperor Garcia deliberately sighed. "The situation of the country is like this. We have to ask Lantis for help, so the other party's arrogance can't help but be a little arrogant. Even if those Lantis generals come to see me, they are still quite disrespectful. It's just that the current situation is like this." Shea immediately smiled, rolled his eyes, and deliberately said with a smile, "Your Majesty, those Lantis people stationed their troops in the capital because they were fighting a war, so they had no choice but to do so. Now that the rebels have been driven away, it's not appropriate for us, the capital of a country, to let outsiders station their troops here. Isn't that so?" Garcia's words were sincere. He frowned and said, "It's just that right now, in the north and west, we still need to rely on the Lantis army to attack the rebel army. Here in the capital, I hinted a few times, but they deliberately pretended not to know. It's obvious that they are not willing to withdraw their troops from the capital." Shea immediately raised his head and puffed out his chest, as if he was duty-bound to serve the country. He said loudly, "How can we allow others to spy on His Majesty's bed? These Lantis troops have finished fighting the war and still refuse to leave the capital. They clearly have bad intentions. Your Majesty, once you give the order, my 10,000 elite cavalry will enter the capital to save the king. No matter what, we can't let these Lantis troops offend His Majesty." When Garcia heard this, the corner of his eyes twitched. "Let your 10,000 elite cavalry enter the city? What a joke! Although the Lantis troops in the city are unsettling, at least I can rest assured that they won't act recklessly. But if I let Shea's cavalry enter the city, I'm afraid I won't be able to sleep at night." Garcia was a little embarrassed by Shea's words. He could only change the topic and casually deal with it. Shea also didn't really want to bring his troops into the city. He also knew that the Emperor was afraid of him and would never allow his troops to enter the city. Adric would also never allow him to do so. Throughout history, when a foreign general brought a large number of troops into the capital, it was always inseparable from the word rebel. Shea was just being ignored by the Emperor for the past 2 days, and was still a little angry in his heart. At this moment, he deliberately said it out loud to squeeze this rabbit Emperor. Seeing that the Emperor was embarrassed, Shea was very happy in his heart. He didn't push it too far and casually changed the topic. However, Garcia's expression immediately changed and he said indifferently, "I heard a rumor today that General Shea has already proposed to the Military Affairs Minister and will be marrying General Adric's daughter in a few days. Is there such a thing?" When Shea heard this, his heart trembled. The Emperor's news was really fast. This matter was known by everyone, so Shea couldn't deny it. He could only nod and say, "Yes, there is such a thing." Garcia's expression didn't change, but his tone was a little strange. "A few days ago, I heard that the Prime Minister wanted to play matchmaker, but was tactfully rejected by the general. I didn't expect that in less than 2 days there would be good news. But this is still a good thing. General Shea was originally a subordinate of the Military Affairs Minister. With this marriage, you will have to work even harder for the Empire in the future." Shea smiled embarrassedly and thought, Lao Tzu's marriage probably won't happen. Not to mention my own wishes, just the fiancé, Via looks like she wants to murder her own husband as soon as she sees him. He also knew that the Emperor was worried that his relationship with Adric would be too close in the future and that they would join forces to overturn the imperial power. However, at this moment, the situation of the nation was like this. Garcia had no other choice but to endure. Seeing Shea's strange smile, Garcia also felt a little strange. Could it be that there was an inside story that he didn't know about? However, the two of them didn't want to talk about this topic in detail. After skipping over it, Garcia immediately invited Shea to have lunch together. Speaking of which, the Emperor had sent someone to summon Shea early in the morning. This Shea put on airs and made the Emperor wait for an entire morning. At this moment, it was already past lunchtime, so the Emperor was naturally hungry. Shea was very respectful at this moment. He gladly accepted the Emperor's invitation and had a royal lunch with Garcia. However, when he saw Garcia's meticulous table manners during the meal, Shea felt even more disdain in his heart. In his opinion, Garcia was not a gentle person. Even the way he ate was full of energy. He was meticulous, as if he was afraid of choking to death in the soup. He was very feminine. However, he recalled that when he first met the late Emperor Cantos, the late emperor was also eating. When he ate, he swept away the clouds like a whirlwind, quite a domineering atmosphere. This Garcia was a little more scheming than Emperor Cantos, but his style and bearing were obviously much worse. After the meal, Emperor Garcia started to talk again. The war in the north has just ended. I'm afraid that life will be difficult. This time, the general has made a great military achievement and is about to become a duke. Life in the north can't be too difficult. I have also stayed in the army before. The army is full of rough men who don't know how to take care of people. I have picked a few maids here. They are all trained in the palace and are used to using them. They know the rules and know the cold and the warmth. I will reward them to the general. In the future, they will take care of the general's daily life. As he spoke, the emperor clapped twice. A side door of the dining hall immediately opened and 10 young women filed in from outside. These 10 young women all had delicate features. Although they could not be considered beauties, they were all above average. They were all wearing the robes of the palace maids. Their movements were respectful and submissive. They lined up in front of Shea and bowed in unison. Immediately, a faint fragrance wafted over. Shea was stunned. He did not expect the emperor to suddenly give him such a hand. Send maids? What a joke! Who knew if there were any spies planted by the emperor in the dark? Send them to take care of his life? If there were any movements in the future, the emperor would immediately get the news. How could he accept this kind of person? Shea's heart skipped a beat. He frowned and was thinking of a way to refuse. The emperor had already nodded to the girls and said indifferently, "All right, all of you go out and tidy up." The girls bowed and left. The emperor gave another look and the servants in the dining hall all left. In such a large dining hall, only the emperor and Shea were left. Shea. Seeing that there was no one around, Garcia opened his mouth. His tone was naturally not as affectionate as before. He said indifferently, "I know that you will naturally be suspicious if I send them to you. However, I do not have any other thoughts about this matter. These girls are just maids. There is no other arrangement." Shea was puzzled. The emperor sighed faintly. "Adeline is with you. You are a boorish man. You can endure hardships. However, she was born in the imperial family. How could she endure hardships? If she follows you, I am afraid that there will be no one to take care of her. These maids are not for you. They are to take care of Adeline." Garcia's words were sincere. Shea raised his head and looked at the emperor. The emperor's eyes did not seem to be fake. At this time, Shea's impression of this young emperor finally improved a little. Although this guy was somewhat disgusting, his sibling relationship with Adeline was real. Shea was not surprised that the emperor knew that Adeline was with him. After all, Adeline had stayed with him for so long and almost held a wedding. Moreover, he had never concealed Adeline's identity. His subordinates all knew that an imperial princess was living in Shea's house. Under the arrangement of Reinhardt, Mad Dog Green and the others, they even purposely spread Adeline's identity in the army. Letting everyone know that Shea was going to marry an imperial princess would be beneficial for Shea's standing in this new army. Giving Shea the identity of a future son-in-law of the imperial family would naturally make his identity more legitimate. Adeline was living in Shea's residence. This was something that everyone in the Moor County knew. Shea had already led his troops to the imperial capital. He had not deliberately instructed his subordinates to conceal this matter. Although the emperor had not received him in these days, the number of people he had sent to spy on him was not small. Perhaps some of them had disguised themselves as coachmen or peddlers to get close to his subordinate. It was not strange for the emperor to know about Adeline's matter. However, since the emperor knew that Adeline was with him and was living in his house, if that was the case, him marrying Adric would clearly be letting Adeline down. As her brother, the emperor actually did not fall out with him? Adeline's background since she was young, Garcia said in a low voice. Her status as a princess is something that the imperial family will never officially recognize, especially when we are currently at war with Odin's people. The imperial family will never recognize a princess with Odin's bloodline. I know that as a duke, the wife you marry must be from a prestigious family. Although Adeline has the imperial bloodline, she cannot have the status and title of the imperial family. Speaking of which, her status does not match your status as a duke. I do not ask for anything else. I just hope that you will treat her well. These few words were very pertinent, making Sheya's impression of the emperor a little better. Then, his tone couldn't help but soften a lot. You can rest assured, as long as I am alive, I will never let her suffer even a little bit. After the two of them looked at each other, they did not say anything else. Both of them were well aware that this was the most they could say to each other. It was impossible for them to say anything more. After lunch, the emperor and Sheya came to the main hall together. After a moment of cordial conversation, the emperor personally sent Sheya out of the main hall under the watchful eyes of many palace servants. Before leaving, he even walked down the stairs with Sheya and sent Sheya off on his horse. Only then did he stop. The Emperor of the Empire, His Majesty Garcia, met General Sheya Thunder in a cordial manner in the palace. The relationship between the Emperor and his subjects was harmonious. The details of this meeting spread out of the palace in less than half a day. The words that spread out emphasized the harmony and cordiality between the Emperor and General Sheya Thunder, how the Emperor appreciated the young general, how the young general was loyal to the Emperor, and so on. Even when Sheya led the team out of the imperial palace, there were 10 more young palace maids in the team. This matter was brought up as a foothold by others. When this spread out, it made the people of the marketplace believe that the young general who came with a large army had a close and harmonious relationship with the imperial family. This young hero of the empire seemed to have an incomparably firm stand on the side of the imperial family. Of course, these words would quickly spread to Lantis' army. It was said that General Gisland of Lantis immediately entered the palace that night to have an audience with the emperor again. The news that spread out from the palace was that General Gisland of Lantis' attitude was much better than before. His attitude was also much more humble. The next day, the people of Lantis announced that the imperial capital Australia had been recovered. The Empire of Lantis, as an ally, had completed the task of helping the Allies to recover the imperial capital. The army of Lantis stationed in Osgilla City would start boarding ships in batches and evacuate from Osgilla City. This news was naturally something that would happen later. At that time, Sheya didn't know about it. Even if he knew, he wouldn't care too much about it. When the Emperor had met with him in the palace, he had put on an amicable expression. Sheya knew that this was a deliberate act for the people of Lantis. Now that Chern Xiaolian had a large number of soldiers stationed outside the city, as long as the Emperor was able to win him over, the balance between the forces of Osgilla City would be reversed. When that happens, there would be no point for the people of Lantis to continue stationing their army here. Although he was being used by the Emperor, this was also Adric's idea. As the Minister of Military Affairs, Adric was naturally unwilling to see a foreign army stationed in his own country's imperial capital for a long time. At that moment, however, Sheya was troubled by another big problem. After the meeting with the Emperor, Sheya returned to his residence. However, he suddenly recalled something important. During the meeting with the Emperor, Garcia had found out that Adeline was with him. Adeline's identity had never been a secret. That was true. However, that was not all. The young Empress, Daphne, was living in Denzel City in Morell County. Daphne's identity was also not a secret to him. Quite a number of people in the army knew about it. Back then, she was one of Shea's trusted aides. She had used Daphne's identity to deter those old foxes in the army. For the Empress to be staying with Sir Shea, it could be seen that Sir Shea was an important figure in the imperial family. Would the others dare to have any other thoughts? However, that was where the problem lay. Since the Emperor knew that Adeline was with him, how could he not know that the Empress was also with him? How could he not know? Since he knew, he had sent 10 maids over to take care of his little sister. However, this Emperor did not mention a word about the Empress. His wife was living somewhere else, yet the Emperor seemed to have completely ignored her. Logically speaking, for the Empress of a country to live somewhere else, it could be said that she had been displaced due to the chaos of war. Now that the situation had stabilized and the Emperor knew about it, he should have immediately ordered Shea to send someone to escort the Empress back to the imperial capital. At the very least, he should have asked a few questions and then sent someone to receive her. However, Garcia had never mentioned anything about it. This attitude was truly unfathomable. Even if you, Emperor Garcia, are a rabbit who only likes men and not women, she is still your wife, the real Empress of the Empire. Living in a war-torn place in the north, you don't even ask about her. You don't even care if she is dead or alive. At the same time, there was one more thing that Shea had not forgotten. He clearly remembered the first time he had met the beautiful Empress Daphne. It was during the hunting meet outside the imperial capital, by the lakeside. At that time, the Empress was being assassinated. If he had not intervened, Daphne would have died. To be continued. If you want to know what will happen, please go to www.chidian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 494. GOR Chapter 455 Trouble Caused by Women, 5,000 Words. In the history of the royal family, the waters were extremely deep. Shea had thought this through. Since the Emperor himself did not ask, it was clear that he was feigning ignorance. Naturally, Shea would not be so foolish as to take the initiative to bring it up to the Emperor. Shea already had enough troubles to deal with. Naturally, he would not do anything that would complicate matters. There were many doubts in his heart, and he could faintly guess a few of them. It was just that he couldn't be sure. If his guess was true, then that beautiful Queen Daphne was truly a woman with a hard life. The friendly meeting between the Emperor and the new imperial noble, General Shea Thunder, quickly created a huge impact in the imperial capital. Originally, after Shea entered the city, the Emperor did not immediately receive this meritorious subject of the empire. Instead, he gave him the cold shoulder for a few days. Such an action was clearly a signal. Therefore, after Shea entered the city, the other nobles in the imperial capital had the intention to get close to this new imperial noble. However, the Emperor's attitude was unclear and even somewhat ambiguous. Naturally, no one dared to express their opinion first. Even the noble who had previously gone to Shea's military camp outside the city and received a gift from Shea spoke a few good words for Shea. However, after seeing that the situation was not quite right, he immediately shut his mouth and no longer dared to casually express his opinion. Everyone was guessing in their hearts what the future of this young general would be like. Will he break off relations with the imperial family? Or, however, after Shea entered the palace to have an audience with the Emperor, news of the harmony between the Emperor and his subjects spread out. The situation suddenly changed. When this news spread out, it was a clear signal. The imperial family seems to be relying heavily on this General Shea. With the Emperor sending out such a clear signal, the people below naturally no longer had any scruples. After Shea returned from the imperial palace, the nobles of the imperial capital came to pay him a visit that night. Previously, when Shea entered the city, Some of the nobles in the imperial capital had only sent people to send a token of greeting. This time, he had personally paid a visit. That night, Shea received several influential figures in the empire's aristocratic circle, such as counts, marquises, and the like, who came in droves. These fellows were the true aristocratic families of the empire. Their words and actions were all aristocratic. Shea was a wild boy who came from the mountains. He was not tired of the nobles' interactions and words. After reluctantly receiving 2 groups of people, he became impatient. He directly sent people to close the door and left a few fierce-looking guards at the door. If anyone came to visit again, they would just say that General Shea had gone out for a visit and had not returned. Of course, Shea didn't have the patience to deal with these nobles, but these nobles might not really think highly of Shea. In the eyes of those nobles, this young general of the empire was a complete country bumpkin. His manners were impolite, he was undivorceable, and he spoke vulgarly, but after all, he had troops and territory in his hands. He was in the limelight, and from the looks of it, even the emperor of the empire greatly relied on General Shea's assistance. The title of Duke was already set in stone. It looked like this vulgar young general was about to become a new member of the empire's noble circle. No matter how much they looked down on this grassroots general, many nobles still had to pull themselves together and fawn over this new noble. Moreover, after receiving 2 batches of visitors, Shea immediately smelled something fishy. The nobles who came to visit him all had their own thoughts and goals. His current territory, Moore County, was a border county. It was a major grain-producing region and also had the benefits of border trade. It was connected to the heartland of the empire and connected to Wildfire Plains and Wildfire Town, an important trade route on the continent. The nobles of the empire all had their own businesses. There were originally many nobles involved in the border trade in the north. It was only because of the chaos in the north that the various families had no choice but to stop doing business. Now that Shea had basically swept through the north, it was foreseeable that border trade would be opened up again in the future. The trade route on the continent would be opened up again. This General Shea was the local bully. Under his rule, any merchant group in Moore County that wanted to do business in the north would have to act according to General Shea's wishes. Border trade had always been extremely profitable. The Ottoman Empire and the Byzantine Empire, regardless of whether the 2 empires were at peace or at war, there was no lack of open and secret trade. There was also the power of the Zaku tribe hidden in the vast mountains of the Wildfire Plains. The specialties of the Zaku tribe were even more sought after on the continent. Such a source of income had been cut off during the war, causing the various families to suffer great losses. Moreover, after the imperial capital was breached, many families had suffered great losses. At this moment, they needed to open up trade routes to recover their strength. At this time, there were many who wanted to build a good relationship with General Shea. Although Shea had closed his doors and declined guests, the various influential families of the empire had stood tall for hundreds of years. They had endless methods to rope in people. It was unknown who spread the news that Shea had brought out 10 young maids from the palace. Many aristocrats immediately thought that they had found a breakthrough. Since this young general was willing to accept the maids bestowed by the emperor, he must be fond of women. This was not surprising. Most young men were fond of women. Liking beautiful women was a common problem among men. They were afraid that you didn't have any hobbies. As long as you had hobbies, it would be easy to handle. Although the various influential families had suffered great losses during the war in the imperial capital, they were still able to stand tall for hundreds of years. Naturally, their foundations were not ordinary. Shea had closed his doors for 2 days, but he had received many generous gifts. There were even some aristocrats who were truly frightening. Didn't the emperor give Shea 10 palace maids? There were some aristocrats who gave 30 or even 50. There were even some who directly pulled over 2 carriages and threw down 100 selected young maids, saying that they were to give them to General Shea to serve his daily life. There were also some who sent a note, saying, "These girls were rough-handed and were not worthy of the general's attention. We will present them to the general first. The general will temporarily use them to take care of some menial chores at home. In the future there will be more gift." There were also some who secretly wrote letters to their southern territories, ordering them to urgently send over a batch of trained young maids from the south. They had to try their best to choose young and beautiful maids and so on. This time, Shea was dumbfounded. In just a short span of 2 to 3 days, the gifts that had been sent to his door had almost filled up 2 rooms. Not only that, there were more than 100 people who had been sent over. This residence was originally just a small house. The residence that Shea and the 50 cavalrymen who accompanied him lived in was not considered spacious. Suddenly, more than 100 young and charming girls were stuffed in, causing the men who were fighting in the army to be at a loss of what to do. These cavalrymen were all elites carefully selected by Shea. They were all elite warriors who had been strengthened by the Muscle Fruit's magic liquid. If they were to be evaluated in terms of strength, I'm afraid that any one of them would be close to the level of a mid-level warrior. Most of the cavalrymen under Shea's command were from the former Roadrear Cavalry Regiment. The Roadrear Cavalry Regiment had always been the Iron Army of the Empire and had the highest casualty rate in war. The cavalrymen in the army were brave and valiant. They would not even blink when fighting in battle. However, most of these elite warriors were single. There were very few who had married and started a family. This was because the casualty rate of the Roadrear Cavalry Regiment was extremely high. After entering this army, although they would become a member of the Iron Army, they would have to be prepared to die in battle at any time. Therefore, most of these cavalrymen were unwilling to marry and start a family. On one hand, the training in the army was tough. In order to become the elite of the elite, they had to put in all their effort to sharpen themselves. There was simply no time and energy to take care of their personal problems. And more importantly, there was another reason. The human heart was made of flesh. Since they knew that they might die on the battlefield one day, they might as well not bring harm to other people's girls. A real man would fight and eat, lick the blood on the blade, live one day at a time. If they were to die on the battlefield one day, it would be the end of them. If they were to marry and have children, what if they were to die on the battlefield one day and leave their family behind? Wouldn't that be harming them? Because of these reasons, most of the Roadrear Cavalry Regiment were single. They would marry very late. Some of them were already over 30 years old and were still single. After all, he was a single man. He was able to feed his family. After receiving his pay, he would drink, eat, and gamble with his comrades in the army. Occasionally, he would run to some red-light district to vent. Who didn't live the life of a boorish soldier like this? But now, these elite warriors didn't know what to do. Suddenly, over 100 young, beautiful, delicate, and fragrant girls were stuffed into this small house. And each one of them was more delicate and gentle than the other. This group of uncouth men in the army simply did not know where to look. As a soldier, he would see a group of men all day long. Suddenly, he would see more than 100 delicate, gentle, and beautiful girls around him every day. Anyone would feel dizzy if they were in his shoes. Which young man did not want to have a woman? They were all at the age where they were full of vigor. Who did not want to have a woman? Shea soon felt the commotion among the boys around him. He also knew that the days of these warriors under him were tough. He, Shea, had a delicate poor thing at home. Naturally, a well-fed man would not know the hunger of a starving man. However, it was not as though he had never cared about the personal problems of these warriors. When soldiers went to war, there was no telling when they might die on the battlefield. If a man could live his entire life without a wife after a battle, he would most likely die. If he did not have a woman to warm his heart and leave behind a child, Wouldn't that be too pitiful? In the past, these mounted soldiers would be stationed near Denzel City for training. Denzel City was a small city. How many people could it have? Shea had 30 to 40,000 mounted soldiers stationed in Denzel City. With 30 to 40,000 men there, how many women could there be in Denzel City? The number of young and single women was even fewer. In the beginning, Shea did not want to accept any of the over 100 maidservants. However, when Shea had wanted to reject the first batch of maidservants, he had noticed the shifty looks on the faces of his mounted soldiers. Even those who were standing guard in the courtyard could not stop themselves from casting glances at the maidservants. How could Shea not understand? This was human nature. It was something that could not be suppressed. Besides, Shea was not the type of officer who would only care about himself and ignore his subordinate. He had to arrange a good home for his brothers. That way, they would not have risked their lives for nothing. Stay. All of you stay. Shea's orders were clear. If someone sends you a gift, accept the gift. If someone sends you a maidservant, accept them all. If someone sends you a male servant, just return it. Needless to say, there were indeed some who sent him a male servant. However, when someone sent him a male servant, Shea's subordinates would politely reject them and return them. As for the young maidservants sent by other families, they would accept them all. In this way, who would not understand? In 2 days, Shea had accepted over 100 maidservants. All of them were young and gentle girls. Outside, there was an endless stream of people who came to deliver themselves to his door. With this, Shea's lecherous reputation had spread throughout the imperial capital. All the nobles in the imperial capital knew about Sir Shea's hobbies. He liked gold, silver, and women. Especially those who sent women over, they would be warmly received by General Shea's subordinate. Among the nobles in the imperial capital, which one of them was not a person who had sharp eyes and eyebrows, their ability to figure out the thoughts of others was not bad. After another 3 days, Shea's residence began to become uninhabitable. Originally, this small residence only had a dozen or so rooms. With dozens of men living in it, it was no longer spacious. In a few days, more than 300 girls were stuffed in one after another. In the beginning, Shea ordered these girls to live in the backyard together. General Shea himself moved out of the backyard and ran to the front to squeeze in with the soldiers. But later, the backyard was also uninhabitable. With hundreds of girls chattering and swallowing, the entire residence was filled with fragrance every day. The soldiers were all restless. Shea immediately gathered his subordinates and scolded jokingly, "Lao Tzu knows what you are thinking. Although these girls are given to me as maidservants, Lao Tzu was born with a hard life and can't bear to be served like this. Among these girls, except for the 10 gifted by the emperor, Lao Tzu doesn't want any of the others. You guys don't have to pretend. If you like someone, go and settle it yourselves. You are not allowed to use force. As long as the girl is willing, Lao Tzu will directly betroth her to you. Each person can only have one. Damn it, the brothers in the barracks outside the city are still bitterly enduring. There is less meat but more wolves. No one is allowed to be greedy." At this moment, the young soldiers under Shea's command almost shouted, "Long live the general!" in joy. In the following days, all the soldiers who were not on duty would run over to the girls when they had time. Men chasing after women was their nature. Although these guys were a little clumsy, they didn't need to be taught this kind of thing. Originally, these girls were sent by the nobles to be Shea's maidservants. In their hearts, they had already decided that they would be the servants of the Duke in the future. These girls were all handpicked. Needless to say, they were all above average in terms of appearance. They had all received training, knew etiquette, and knew how to serve people. The maidservants trained by the rich and powerful families were originally somewhat reserved. But after all, they were still young girls at the age of youth. It was natural for men and women to be attracted to each other. Moreover, Each and every one of Shea's subordinates was a good man, outstanding and valiant, full of masculine men. Shea had already said that he didn't need anyone to serve him. If he liked anyone, he would betroth them. Moreover, Shea had also made it clear that these soldiers by his side were the elites of the army. In the future, they would follow him and would be put in important positions. Who knows, they might have a meteoric rise in the future. These girls trained by the rich and powerful families weren't fools. The soldiers who could follow the general were all the trusted subordinates of the general. Naturally, they would be put in important positions in the future. Moreover, these young men's conditions were indeed not bad. The kind of valiant spirit that had been honed on the battlefield was not something that ordinary men could compare to. However, in 3 or 4 days, Shea heard that there were already more than 10 pairs of interesting men under his command. This wasn't the end. Shea felt that this was a good idea. He simply let people spread the word that he was going to purchase more servants in the imperial capital. What he lacked the most were maidservants. When this news spread out, those who originally wanted to find ways to get close to this young nobleman, wouldn't they also cater to his fancy? More and more people were sent over. There were also some who didn't have anyone on hand at the moment. If they wanted to send someone over, they had already mobilized people from the south and sent them over to General Shea in a few days. After a few days, Shea counted the numbers and was shocked by himself. There were as many as 360 girls who had been sent over. In addition, there were also some nobles who had sent over messages. Even the list of gifts had been prepared. The expected number of people who would be sent over was in the hundreds. In just a few days, there were already thousands of girls under Shea's name. This reputation of being lecherous had already changed in the imperial capital. Everyone said that this young general of the empire was brave and fierce in battle, but his lecherous nature was a bit too good. His plundering of girls was a bit too unsightly. Seeing that this house could no longer accommodate them, Shea simply gave the order, "Leave the city and return to the barracks." In any case, he had already met the emperor. The show that he had to put on was over. All that was left was to wait for the empire's reward documents to be completed. Then, he could set off for home. He brought his men out of Osgilla and returned to the barracks that were stationed 10 miles outside the city. Hundreds of girls were brought back to the barracks, which immediately caused a stir in the army. To be continued. If you want to know what happened next, please go to www.chidian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 495. GOR Chapter 456, Adrik's Problem, 6,000 words. Shea's order was also very clear, causing the eyes of all the young and single kanji soldiers in the army to light up. However, Shea was cautious. After all, his army was still outside. If he caused everyone's morale to drop, he was afraid that there would be trouble. He simply gave another order, having the girls form a separate battalion and send people to stand guard outside. No one is allowed to disturb them. If you want to pursue a girl, go home first. Now that the army is stationed outside, no one is allowed to cause trouble. Otherwise, you will be punished according to military law. But in this way, there was a strange phenomenon in the army. The duty of guarding the women's barracks in shifts became a hot job. The soldiers were all sharp-witted and took the initiative to take up the duty of guarding the women's barracks. It was said that a few battalions were secretly competing with each other for this. Now, the army only had 3,000 riders. The Allied army with the Besta military district only existed in name now. After the governor's wife entered the imperial capital, the 7,000 riders of the Besta military district were separated from Shea's army. Shea waited for a few more days and finally received news from the city. The empire's noble council had completed the formalities for Shea's title. After the noble council reviewed Shea Thunder's achievements, deeds, reputation, and background, they officially recognized Shea Thunder as the Empire's Duke. The legal documents of the Duke's title, the decree, and the signed documents of the noble council were all sent to Shea's hands. From now on, Shea had officially become the Empire's Duke. His fief was Notts County. To the public, he was known as the Duke of Notts. Of course, there were many complicated details in the process of the noble's title. For example, Shea had to submit his duke's family emblem, family genealogy, and so on. This was not a simple matter. The emblem of a noble family was not something that could be casually used by drawing a symbol. The emblem of a noble family naturally had its own pattern and rules. What kind of emblem could be used for each identity was very particular and could not be overstepped. For example, a clan emblem with a crown on it could only be used by those who were related to the royal family or had a branch of the royal family bloodline. Others were absolutely not allowed. There was also the image of the sword and scepter. Only in the family genealogy would one have the right to use it if one's ancestor held a certain rank in the military. Another example would be the pictures of some flowers and plants. Some of them were clearly written and could only be used if one's ancestor had achieved a certain level of meritorious service. These things all had their own traditions. This was also known as heraldry. How could Shea know anything about heraldry? A year ago, when he was made a baron of the empire, Fatso had already hired some scholars from the imperial capital to make a set of these things for him. But now that he had become a duke from a baron, it was a little too crude to use the previous clan emblem. Fortunately, the entire empire was doing their best to curry favor with this young duke. In any case, the procedures for the title had already been completed. As for when Sir Shea would have the time to make the clan emblem and other things, he would have someone send it to the imperial capital aristocratic council and fill in the paperwork. After waiting for another 2 days, the military also issued an official document. Shea's appointment as the general of the northern garrison region had been reported to the military. The military had issued this document to the entire empire. What surprised Shea was that in addition to the general of the northern garrison region position, the military also added a title to Shea's title: Military Staff Commissioner. This position had always belonged to the General Staff Department of the military. The position of a staff commissioner was much higher than that of an ordinary staff officer. The position of a staff commissioner was second only to the chief of staff and the ministers. The Minister of Military Affairs and Deputy Minister were considered chief of staff, while the heads of the various departments in the military were considered ministers. The staff commissioner was also an important member of the military. This could be considered as giving Shea an empty position in the central military of the empire. In addition to the position of a local general, there was an additional position in the military. This was probably Adric's idea. The official position and the title of duke were all settled. Then, according to the usual practice, Shea could submit a request to the military to bring the troops back to his territory. Shea made his preparations and personally brought people back to the imperial capital. He went to the military to submit his request to return to the north. At the same time, he met with General Adric again. Adric was busy with military affairs. After the imperial capital was recovered, he had a huge military mess in his hands. On one hand, he had to reorganize the army and strengthen his control over the Ostjilla region. On the other hand, he had to speed up the mobilization of the local garrison troops and resources from the south to prepare for a major counterattack against the rebel army. There was a mountain of work waiting for him to deal with. Adric was so busy that he didn't even have time to eat or sleep. Even so, he still met with Shea in his office. Regarding Shea's request to return, Auderic pondered for a moment and then directly rejected it. Wait a few more days. Faced with Adric's words, Shea appeared to be in a difficult position. It had been quite some time since he led the troops out. Speaking of which, bringing the troops to the imperial capital to save the emperor was a race against time. He had just taken over Ilton County before he set out, and there were still a lot of military affairs to deal with at home. Although he had taken over Ilton County and the Corsica region, there were still many things to be done to digest such a huge victory. Shea naturally wanted nothing more than to return to the north immediately. "I know you are impatient," Adrik looked at Shea and said in a serious tone, "but right now we need you more here. The Lantis have indicated that they will withdraw their troops from Osgilla in batches. But their advantage lies in batches. If you stay here, you will be a deterrent to them. If you leave, their plan to withdraw from the imperial capital will have to be deliberately delayed." Shea frowned and said, "Although I claim to have 10,000 cavalrymen, in fact, only 3,000 of them are mine. The Besta people have 7,000. Although I leave, the Besta people will still be here. Their 7,000 cavalrymen should be enough." Adrik shook his head and stared at Shea. "Because of this, you can't leave now. To outsiders, the Besta people have 7,000 cavalrymen and you only have 3,000. But to the Lantis people, your name, Shea Thunder, is the real deterrent. The Lantis people don't care about the Besta people at all. After all, you, Shea Thunder, are the one who defeated Odin's Scarlet Snow army. Not to mention that you have 3,000 cavalrymen. Even if you only have 300 cavalrymen, the Lantis people won't dare to act rashly if you stay here." Shea smiled bitterly and touched his chin. He sighed. "Damn it, Lao Tzu's name is still so useful? What do you think?" Adrik sneered. "A famous general's reputation is built on countless lives and blood. Your name, Shea, represents deterrence. It represents a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood. How can the Lantis people not be deterred? If it were an unknown person, who would care?" Shea nodded and couldn't help but feel a little proud. But Adrik's tone immediately changed. "To outsiders, it's because of this. Another reason was because of the internal conflict. After all, the Besta people are a newly surrendered army. If you leave and leave them in the imperial capital, I'm afraid the higher-ups won't be at ease." The higher-ups intend to use the Besta people to restrict you, but they won't be at ease with them. After all, they used to be part of the rebel army. If you leave, and the 7,000 cavalrymen of the Besta people are here, if something happens, your presence here is also a deterrent to the Besta people." Shea's eyes lit up. "The higher-ups aren't at ease with the Besta people?" Adrik snorted and looked deeply at Shea. "Didn't you tell the Prime Minister to be wary of the Besta people? Shea was stunned. He had indeed said this to the Prime Minister, and it was the governor's wife who had begged him to say it. "Yes, I did say that." Shea nodded. Adrik frowned and looked at Shea. Then, he stood up and walked to the door. He closed the door and turned to look at Shea. In a low voice, he said, "Why did you say that to the Prime Minister?" Shea hesitated, then slowly said, "It's not without reason. After all, the Besta people have just surrendered. If we don't guard against them at all—" Adrik smiled slightly. "Is that what you really think?" Shea smiled bitterly. "All right, General, please understand. Well, aren't the higher-ups afraid of me? This time, they used the Besta people. Judging from the rewards, it's obvious that they want to divide my relationship with the Besta people. I might as well cater to their desires. Aren't they trying to make me and the Besta people hate each other? So I deliberately said bad things about the Besta people behind their back. That way, they won't have to worry." "How is your relationship with the Besta people?" Adrik asked. Shea hesitated for a moment, but in the end, he didn't hide anything. "Our relationship is not bad. We're working together." Adrik chuckled and looked at Shea. His smile was a bit strange. "It seems that you and the governor's wife have a tacit understanding. You told the Prime Minister to guard against the Besta people, and the governor's wife said that when she met with the Prime Minister, she said that the Empire's top priority right now was to limit the growth of new warlords. Limit the growth of new warlords. Looking around, other than you, Shea, who else can be called a new warlord? Both of you are saying bad things about each other behind their back. You must have a tacit understanding long ago, right? Shea laughed dryly, but didn't say anything. He might as well just admit it. Adrik waved his hand. I don't care about these little tricks of yours. But it's also a good thing that the higher-ups don't have to worry about you. As long as you don't have any thoughts that you shouldn't have, it's fine. Shea sighed inwardly. Even at this time, Adrik still didn't forget to warn him. There's one more thing. Adrik's expression was a bit unhappy. I heard that you've taken in quite a few women a few days ago? It's over. Shea's face paled. Shea wouldn't care if others asked about this matter. Even if others said that he was a pervert, Shea would only treat it as nonsense. However, Adrik's involvement in this matter was a bit difficult to deal with. No matter what, he had proposed to Adrik. In name, he was his future father-in-law. If the news of him taking in a few hundred maids in the city spread, and he hadn't even married their daughter, yet he had already found so many women. Speaking of which, Adrik would probably be very unhappy. Shea hurriedly explained in detail. After hearing this, Adrik's expression softened and he nodded. I knew it. You shouldn't be that kind of pervert. The war in the north has just ended, and you have tens of thousands of troops stationed there. The ratio of men and women is imbalanced. Taking the opportunity to get some women back is just a small trick. I don't care about this, but... Shea's heart moved, and he hurriedly told him about his encounter with Vaya. At the end of the story, he smiled bitterly. Sir, Miss Vaya has a prejudice against me, I think. What he meant was that he was trying to shirk the responsibility. Adrik snorted. I don't care about the matters of you young people. Since you have proposed, how to deal with my daughter is your problem. Humph. Do you need me to teach you how to pursue a woman? Women spend more effort to coax them, and they will get better. After a pause, the old man probably knew that his daughter was a bit different, so his tone softened a little. He whispered, Vaya and I have a relationship. It's a long story. Alas, I have never had the time to discipline her. Her temperament is a bit special. For my sake, you should tolerate her a little. Since I have promised her to you, I will rely on you to take good care of her for the rest of her life. Shea thought, take care of Vaya for the rest of her life? I'm afraid that when she sees me, she will stab me with a knife. Shea wouldn't even frown if he had to lead an army to attack Odin's people. But when it comes to Miss Vaya, it would be a real headache. Alright, that's all for now. Don't think about going back for the time being. Wait a few days outside the city. Besita's reward and appointment have also been announced. When they return, you will leave with them. Only then will the higher-ups be at ease. Delay for a few more days, so that I can put pressure on Lantis and urge them to withdraw their troop. Adrik gave the order directly. Then, as if he had thought of something, he glanced at Shea. You sent people to deliver 200 horses a few days ago. You did well. I thank you on behalf of the military. But I am short on manpower right now, so I don't have any military funds to pay you. Shea immediately patted his chest and said, There is no need for money. Just treat it as a show of filial piety from me. Adrik laughed and glanced at Shea. If that is the case, why don't you show some filial piety? Tomorrow, send someone to deliver 200 more horses. Shea's face immediately turned bitter. Send 200 more? That would be 400 horses. These were all top-notch warhorses. 400 warhorses was enough to equip a cavalry battalion. What are you frowning for? Adrik laughed. I know you are worried about it. But right now, the situation in the imperial capital is tense. You are in the northern part of Moore County, so it is much easier for you to get warhorses. Humph, you have a border trade channel. In the future, do you still care about this little bit of money? Shea was helpless. He gritted his teeth and said, "Fine, I will send someone to deliver them tomorrow. But sir, these are the last 200 horses. If you want more, I don't have any left. I have thousands of cavalry soldiers. If I don't have any horses, I can't have my men run back to the north. I also have a lot of goods." Goods? Humph, it must be the spoils of war from the rebel army. Adrik laughed. Shea quickly shouted out, "Those things, don't even think about it. My subordinates risked their lives to obtain those things. If you want me to hand them over, I fear my subordinates will not accept it. Besides, I have tens of thousands of men under me. Men eat and horses eat, the expenditure is huge. I am still waiting to bring these things back to raise my army." "Humph, I did not say that I want your spoils of war." Adrik shook his head. "These days, in addition to receiving a lot of women, those nobles also sent you a lot of gifts, right? Let's not talk about them, but there should be at least tens of thousands of gold coins." Shea snickered and did not elaborate. Actually, it was not just tens of thousands of gold coins. After a rough calculation, he estimated that the value of the gifts sent over was probably over hundreds of thousands of gold coins, and that did not include the value of the female attendants sent over. Adrik's face turned ugly. At this moment, the war is not over yet. The military is preparing to organize a counterattack, and the Empire's military budget is tight. I have already expressed my feelings to His Majesty, wanting those nobles to donate some military funds. Those fellows are all complaining incessantly, giving excuses left and right, but they are unwilling to contribute to the Empire. Those short-sighted fellows. Do they not understand that if we cannot complete the counterattack and wipe out the rebels, the Empire's crisis will not be resolved, no matter how much money they have in the future? Humph, I fear they will not have the life to spend it. It would appear that Adrik had been having a headache over the matter of the military budget these days. He had also suffered quite a bit from the nobles of the Empire, and a lot of anger had accumulated in his heart. However, Shea did not say anything. He had given Adrik several hundred horses. This was already a show of his kindness to Adrik. If he was asked to donate military funds, that would be impossible. He himself had to raise tens of thousands of soldiers. However, Shea rolled his eyes and said, "Sir, regarding the matter of military funds, I do have a way." Adrik's eyes lit up. "Tell me," Shea said coolly. "I am in the north. Embark County is a war-torn place. Naturally, there is a shortage of supplies. If we were to rely on the local finances, forget about tens of thousands of soldiers, I fear that we would only be able to raise a few thousand soldiers at most. Back then, due to the lack of military funds and supplies, I simply implemented military administration." Military administration? Adrik's face changed. "All supplies will be gathered and rationed," Shea said coolly. "It doesn't matter if it is a rich merchant or a large family. At that time, there is no other way. If there is no money, once the city is breached, everyone will be finished. At a time like this, if we show mercy, we will not be able to survive. In the north, Embark County, Denzel City and Metter City, I implemented a military administration and rationing system. All supplies must be handed over. No one is exempted. Regardless of their status, be it local nobles, merchants or commoners, they must hand over all their supplies. Then, the military will register them. After that, according to the number of people, the amount of food needed will be distributed every day. As for military funds, it is the same. During times of war, survival is the most important thing. Only by staying alive will there be meaning. Isn't that just daylight robbery?" Adrik shook his head. It is not daylight robbery, it is rationing. When supplies are scarce, there is no other choice. Speaking of which, the main targets are those rich people. Humph, the army cannot eat their fill and the commoners cannot eat their fill. Those rich people, on the other hand, still have food stored in their granaries. They even have gold and silver hidden in their storehouses. Why should I protect such people? My soldiers are risking their lives to fight against Odin's men. Who is that for? These rich people are not even willing to fork out military funds or contribute food. Thus, there is no need for me to be courteous to them. There was a peculiar expression on Adrik's face. He lowered his head and frowned, not saying anything. Shea said coolly, "Naturally, the situation in the north is different compared to the imperial capital. Mo or county only has some rich merchants. As for the imperial capital, it is filled with aristocratic families. It is impossible to use the same method to forcefully seize their property." However, Shea lowered his voice and said, "Back then, the imperial capital was breached by the rebel army. I heard that back then, some of the aristocratic families seemed to be in cahoots with the rebel army. Sir, why don't you do something about it?" Adrik's eyes lit up. He had spent his life fighting battles and was not a soft-hearted person. He glanced at Shea and said, "You mean, there is no point in pursuing the matter. When faced with a difficult situation, everyone will find a way out for themselves. Truth be told, you cannot really blame them. However, people must always pay the price for what they have done. When the enemy comes, they surrender. After the enemy leaves, they will come and hug your thigh. That is not a good thing. Why don't you spread the news that you are preparing to investigate the internal collusion with the rebel army? Then, you can ask the aristocrats to donate military funds. Do both at the same time. Those aristocrats are not fools. I guarantee that once you do this, there will be people who will take the lead in donating military funds." At this point, Shea frowned and said, "However, there is a problem with this matter, and that is offending people. These aristocratic families are deeply rooted. If they are caught in the act for a short period of time, they will have no choice but to donate money. However, after the matter is over, I am afraid that they will hold a grudge against you, so, don't do this matter yourself. Just find someone to do it. In my opinion, you might as well do this matter of calling for everyone to donate military funds. As for the investigation of the internal collusion with the rebel army, you might as well leave it to the Prime Minister to handle. Shea's smile was somewhat strange. Humph, that Prime Minister first made a fuss about his own fief. He gave Hastings's territory to me. It was obvious that he wanted to trick Lao Tzu. Then, he deliberately made me marry Adrik's daughter. Speaking of which, I had no choice but to take the initiative to ask for her hand in marriage. It was also because of the Prime Minister's methods. That old man had set 2 traps for him without batting an eyelid. No matter what, he had to pay him back for it. The matter of collecting money will be left to Adrik. As for the matter of ordering the investigation of those aristocrats who have offended the rebels, I will leave it to the Prime Minister. Adrik glanced at Shea and hesitated for a moment. Then, he sighed. Fine. Unusual times call for unusual things. I will consider your suggestion. To be continued. If you want to know the future, please go to www.chidian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 496. Gor Chapter 457 Die 4. After leaving Adrik's place, Shea felt somewhat uneasy. As he walked out of the military headquarters, he saw Ruhr's bloated figure standing in front of the statue of the Duke of the Tulip family in a daze. Shea immediately strode over and laughed loudly from a few steps away. "Fatso, what are you thinking of doing here?" Ruhr turned his head and saw Shea. He smiled and said, "Why are you here?" Shea pursed his lips and pointed at the military headquarters. Fatso immediately understood. He smiled thoughtfully and walked over to pat Shea on the shoulder. He slowly said, "Don't be in a hurry to go back. It's about time. Adrik will not let you go now. Our emperor is also reluctant to let you go. The news of you fighting with the Lantis people a few days ago has spread throughout the capital and the entire army, and it's really inspiring. Although our emperor doesn't like you, I'm afraid he is secretly happy about this matter." Shea's expression was indifferent. He said lightly, "I didn't do that to curry favor with anyone. I just can't stand to see those Lantis people being so arrogant." Fatso laughed. "You can't stand to see others being arrogant in front of you, right? You think I don't know your character?" After saying that, the two of them walked side by side out of the military headquarters. When they reached the gate outside the military headquarters, the guards at the gate immediately stood up and saluted. After Shea and Roar solemnly returned the salute, they walked out of the military headquarters. Roar grabbed Shea and said, "Are you going to leave the city and return to the barracks?" Shea frowned. "The city is stuffy. If I don't leave the city, where else can I go?" Roar thought for a moment and said, "That's fine. With your character, I'm afraid you'll cause trouble in the city. What happened that day could not be repeated. If that happened once, it would be fine. If we really got into a fight with Lantis's people, our emperor might not be happy." After thinking for a while, Roar said, "Since I have nothing to do, I'll follow you out of the city for a walk. This city is very stuffy, and I've been holding it in for a few days." The two of them each took a horse from the hands of the accompanying guards. They were not in a hurry to get on the horse, but instead led the horse and slowly walked side by side. The guards followed him from a distance and were on alert at all times. "You still haven't told me why you came to the military." Shea recalled how Fatso was standing beside the statue in a daze. It seemed that Fatso's expression was a little unnatural. Shea's heart skipped a beat, and he vaguely understood something. He sighed. "Roar, if you're not happy staying in the capital, why don't you come north with me?" Fatso raised his eyebrows and laughed. "What? You even want to recruit Lao Tzu? Do you want to see me salute you in the future? No way, no way. It's fine if I become your friend, but if I become your subordinate and have to salute you every day, Lao Tzu is not willing." Shea knew that Roar was just joking. However, the other party's refusal surprised Shea. "You want to stay in the capital so badly?" Speaking of which, Shea had a rough understanding of Roar's experience in the capital. Although Fatso had made great contributions, the imperial family was not willing to put this last remaining general of the empire in an important position. Fatso had fought with almost all of the Rodrier cavalry to push Garcia onto the throne. After that, he was left idle. After the capital fell, Fatso led a few death-sworn soldiers to resist. He also made great contributions during the recovery of the capital. Unexpectedly, the emperor still did not put Fatso in an important position. This kind of thing was naturally unusual. However, the official statement only said that General Roar had made outstanding contributions. It was just that the injured soldiers had not yet recovered. Therefore, the empire wanted to appoint another position to wait for the arrangements and so on. In fact, Fatso was left idle again. Although Roar seems to be open-minded, in fact, Shea knows that this fatty is a person with great aspirations in his heart. Although he felt that it was unfair for Fatso, Shea could not influence the imperial family's decision. Fatso seemed mediocre, but he was actually very talented. Shea naturally wanted to bring him to the north to work together. However, Fatso pretended not to know when he mentioned it several times. Now that he explained it in person, Fatso bluntly refused. This made Shea somewhat puzzled. Could it be that Fatso was still loyal to the imperial family? Shea did not believe that Fatso was a loyalist. The words that this fatty had said to him in secret were simply treasonous and unfilial. He knew that the emperor did not like him, so why did he insist on staying in the imperial capital? Looking at Shea's puzzled eyes, Roar sighed and turned back to point in the direction of the military headquarters. The two of them walked all the way, and unknowingly, they had already walked more than 100 meters. Fatso raised his hand and pointed, then withdrew it and said in a low voice, "That guy Adrik's personality is so unyielding and extreme. Although he seems to be in the limelight now and is the head of the military, he is actually on a stove. Who knows when he will get into big trouble? Sigh, his personality is too impatient. I am worried that he will encounter something that he can't get over. If his temper flares up, he will be stubborn and get into big trouble. Now that his old friends in the military have withered, there are not many people who can talk to him. I am afraid that he will not listen to other people's words, but I have known him for a while, so he can still reluctantly listen to my words. If I stay in the imperial capital, even if I don't become a high-ranking official or general, I can at least be by his side and give him advice. If he encounters any trouble, I can give him advice. When his temper flares up, it is also good to be able to persuade him a little." Only then did Shea understand, and he also sighed. He wasn't born in the Byzantine Empire, so he didn't really agree with Adaric's loyalty to the empire. If he was in Adaric's shoes, he would have already rebelled. Seeing that Roar was determined, Shea did not say anything. After walking for a few more steps, Shea inadvertently mentioned his conversation with Adrik. He mentioned that Adrik was worried about the military expenses and the ideas that he gave to Adrik. Without waiting for Shea to finish, Roar's expression immediately changed to Wu Rant's. He stamped his feet and cried out, "Oh no! How could you give him such an idea?" Shea was puzzled. Those nobles are rich. At this time of national crisis, if they don't fork out money, who will? If not them, who else can we find? That's true, but you can't tell Adrik about this idea. You can't let Adrik do this. Shea smiled. Of course I know. Making a move against those nobles is a big offense. I also gave the general an idea. As for this matter, the offending job can be pushed to the Prime Minister. In any case, as the Prime Minister, it is his duty to supervise the imperial officials. Roar shook his head and sighed with a bitter expression. You brat, don't you know Adrik's temperament? He frowned. That's easy for you to say. Adrik is in charge of persuading the nobles to donate money to the military and having the Prime Minister come forward to investigate the collusion with the rebels. But think about it, how cunning is that Salem Bonili? How can he really do something that offends people? I'm afraid he'll just refuse a few times and leave it unsettled. Shea pondered for a moment. Even if the Prime Minister is cunning and unwilling to help, we can just forget about it. It's not that simple. Roar sighed. Don't you know Adrik's temperament? He's too straightforward and only cares about the public interest. If the Prime Minister refuses to help, Adrik will probably go into action himself in order to raise funds. Needless to say, he's skilled in military matters, but he's not good at politics. I'm afraid that before he can use the Prime Minister as a weapon, that old fox will use him first. What he said was not false. Most likely, the Prime Minister would not do anything to offend people, but Adrik was too straightforward. If things did not go well, he would be worried about the military funds and would really go into action himself. At that time, he would offend a large number of nobles. Shea frowned. Without military funds, there's no way to reorganize the army and organize a counterattack. Without a counterattack, there's no way to eliminate the rebels. This is an important matter for the Empire. In the end, if it can't be carried out smoothly, I'm afraid the Emperor won't be able to protect himself. Under this premise, the Emperor will probably support Adrik. After all, it's the key to his throne and rule. What you said makes sense. We have to do it, but how we do it is a matter of great care. Roar said seriously. Shea, you've been in war for a long time, so you don't understand the matters of the nobles in the Empire. The Empire is not Moor. Moor County is just a bunch of rich nobles from the countryside. You can deal with them and force them to fork out money and food. You can do whatever you want in Moor, and others can't do anything to you. But you can't do that in the Empire. Those nobles, which one of them isn't deeply rooted. Their relationships are like a spider's web, and they are inextricably linked to the imperial family. You have to understand. The current situation in the Empire is that the Emperor lacks prestige in the army, and he can no longer control the military power. So he can only firmly unite those nobles by his side to strengthen himself. At this time, the nobles are the Emperor's biggest support for his rule. Why would he act against the nobles? But if the nobles don't fork out money, his throne will still be unstable. That's why it depends on how it's done. Roar shook his head. In the Emperor's heart, I'm afraid he wants the nobles to fork out money, but he doesn't want to offend the nobles. In the end, the blame for offending the nobles will still fall on Adrik's head. When the time comes, the Emperor will definitely not publicly declare his position and will just let Adrik do as he pleases. In the worst case, the Emperor will push the blame to Adrik and let him be the target for offending the nobles. Shea thought for a while and felt that this was the most likely possibility. He couldn't help but frown. If it was someone else, they would definitely hide far away when they encountered such a situation. But Shea understood Adrik. The general was a fair person and rarely cared about personal gains and losses. Others might not be able to avoid this kind of blame, but Adrik, as long as it was really beneficial to the Empire, with his character, he would probably take the initiative to take the blame. Besides, if the Emperor wants to keep Adrik in check, he will have to unite the nobles to balance the military power. I'm afraid he will deliberately sow discord between Adrik and the nobles. Roar's expression became more and more unpleasant. Why did you give him such an idea? Shea was also a little worried. I just want to help the general. Reckless. Roar sighed. Using the local way of handling matters in the imperial capital will only invite disaster. Adrik sighed, this won't do. With this matter, I can't leave the imperial capital. I have to stay here and give him advice. Shea knew he might have done something bad with good intentions. He was also worried, how about I turn back now and tell the general, it's no use. Roar sighed, with his character, once he believes your idea is effective, he won't care about offending others. Even if you try to persuade him now, he won't listen. Sigh. After a pause, Roar glanced at Shea. I have an idea. I'm afraid we need someone to step forward for this matter. If the old man steps forward, he might be able to lessen the pressure on Adrik. All right, I won't go with you. There's no time to lose, I will go see the old man. Shea's heart skipped a beat. He immediately understood the meaning behind Roar's words. The Duke of Minas. The old man Roar spoke of must be the Duke of Minas. With this imperial elder's help, with his weight and prestige, he was an elder in the army. Among the nobles, he was also a duke. If he stepped forward, the nobles would give him some face and smoothly solve the issue of raising military funds. Roar immediately bid farewell to Shea, mounted his horse, and left at lightning speed. Shea was a little depressed. He was kind enough to give Adrik some advice, but he didn't think it would bring him more trouble. His heart was naturally irritated. He led his men out of the city and back to the camp. When he reached the camp, he saw the strange expressions of the cavalry officers who stayed behind. Looking at the time, it was already past the time for the daily exercise, but the soldiers in the army seemed to have gathered. What happened? Shea's face didn't look too good. One of the cavalry officers who stayed behind cautiously came up with an ugly face. General, something happened. These kids got into trouble this morning. A group of people got into a fight. Hearing that, Shea's heart relaxed a little. Fight? This wasn't a big deal. The army was filled with young men full of vigor. Young men were full of vigor. It wasn't strange for there to be some friction between them. Although the army strictly forbade fights between fellow soldiers, this kind of thing wouldn't really cause any big trouble. At most, it would be a violation of the military rules. They would be punished with a military rod or a few whips. Shea smiled faintly. Just as he was about to say something, the officer smiled bitterly and said, "It wasn't our own people who got into a fight. This group of kids got into a fight with their allies and some of them got hurt." Shea's eyes immediately widened. He snorted heavily and his face sank. "Speak, what happened?" His subordinate officer carefully recounted what had happened. Speaking of which, this matter wasn't complicated. Shea had brought 10,000 cavalry with him from the imperial capital. 7,000 of them were from the Besta military district. At that time, they were known as the National Defense Army. However, they had been disbanded a few days ago. Shea's 3,000 cavalry and the 7,000 cavalry from the Besta military district had already split up. Everyone had their own military camps outside Osgilla city. Shea's camp occupied an empty little village, while the Besta military district occupied a small village less than 5 miles away. Usually, everyone had a clear distinction between themselves. After all, they had come here together and had some friendship, so they lived in harmony. Shea's cavalry were all elites. Even if they were stationed here, they would train every day. Every day, before dawn, they would sound the horn to assemble and the cavalry would go out for training. They didn't stop. As for the Besta military district, although they were also known as elites, compared to Shea's troops, who were once the true elites of the Rodria military district, they were still lacking. The Besta military district was stationed there, but they didn't train much. Every day, they would only send out a few roaming soldiers to patrol. However, after splitting up, everyone was officially separated. They were no longer part of the same army, and a small dispute had arisen. Speaking of which, it was a bit laughable. Shea's cavalry would sound the horn to assemble for training every day before dawn, but the Besta military district was still sleeping soundly. After a long time, some of them complained that Shea's troops were disturbing their rest by blowing the horn every morning. Originally, this was just a small matter that wouldn't be brought to the table. But this morning, Shea's cavalry had finished their training in the wilderness and were resting beside a river to drink water for their horses. This river ran through the villages where the two armies were stationed. Shea's army was upstream, while the Besta military district was downstream. Shea's cavalry had finished their training and were resting by the river. The soldiers had been training for half a day and were covered in sweat. Some of them directly jumped into the river to take a bath. Coincidentally, there were Besta soldiers collecting water downstream. When they saw Shea's men drinking water upstream, they could accept it, but the soldiers were even jumping into the water to take a bath. How were they supposed to get water? Were they supposed to ask them to drink their bath water? The Besta soldiers were annoyed and sent someone to negotiate. It was just a small matter, and everyone had made it clear. Shea's soldiers weren't unreasonable people. Besides, the people downstream were collecting water to drink, and they were bathing upstream. It was indeed a bit unreasonable. General, those Besta people are really abominable. If they had calmly spoken to us, it's not like we don't want to preach. Naturally, we would have relented and allowed them to come upstream to get more water. But their people's mouths are foul and they insulted us. Our brothers couldn't take it and started fighting. When Shea heard this, he sneered. Foul mouths? What did they say? The officer frowned and said, They said that when we were splitting up, why were we at the upstream and they at the downstream? They said that we were bullying them. They also said that we were bragging about defeating the Scarlet Snow Army. Who knows if it's true or not? It's not like we haven't heard of fake military exploit. They also said that you're still young and probably haven't even grown out. How could you have such abilities? Most likely, you're just faking military exploits. When Shea heard this, he wasn't angry. He said calmly, "What else?" The officer sneered and said, "These are just their grumbling words. The most important point is about the division of the spoils." Spoils? Shea remembered that when his army had just arrived, they were met with a huge defeat of the rebel army. The whole army went up to fight and captured a large number of rebels. They seized countless spoils of war. Logically speaking, it was Shea's cavalry who had rushed to the front. The Besta cavalry moved slowly and gathered slowly. They only followed behind to pick up the spoils. However, the problem was that Shea's cavalry had rushed too quickly. After they had crushed the rebel army, they drove straight down and left the work of cleaning up the battlefield to the Besta people. Speaking of which, the matter of collecting the prisoners of war and counting the spoils of war was done by the Besta people. After that, on the Besta side, the governor's wife had sent people to divide the spoils of war and send them over. However, this matter had planted the seeds of conflict. The spoils of war they had seized from the rebel army were really a huge windfall. The rebel army had been entrenched in the kingdom for several days, burning, killing, and looting. They had tormented the largest and most majestic city in the continent until it was like a ghost city. Countless large families had been exterminated. Naturally, the rebel army had gotten their fill. The spoils of war they had brought back were piled up like a mountain. When the governor's wife had sent people to send over half of such a huge amount of wealth, the greedy soldiers below were naturally dissatisfied. From their point of view, how could they give away the spoils of war that they had already obtained? As for the fact that the rebel army had been crushed by Shea's cavalry, they did not care about these details. In any case, the things that had fallen into their hands were theirs. They were all ownerless things, so they belonged to whoever snatched them. As for Shea's cavalry, they had rushed too quickly and did not leave anyone to clean up. That was what they deserved. Since the Besta people had cleaned up the spoils, they should naturally take them into their own pockets. Later on, the two sides had divided their forces and were stationed separately. Every day, Shea's army would sound the horn to gather before dawn. At that time, most of the Besta soldiers were still asleep. When they were woken up by the horn, they naturally felt even more indignant. For some reason, the news that Shea had proposed to General Adrik in Osgilla City and wanted to marry the military minister's daughter had also spread. Naturally, there were also those with dirty thoughts in the Besta army. They slandered him with malicious words. "Look, that young general is indeed useless. He still has to rely on marrying the military minister's daughter to climb up the rank. Isn't he just relying on his wife's nepotism? After all, how many of the lower-level soldiers really understood the situation in the upper echelons of the empire?" The two sides had already planted the seeds of conflict. These malicious words were also very popular in the Besta army. Just this morning, the soldiers from both sides had an argument by the river. The people from the Besta side had spoken rudely. At that time by the river, Shea's cavalry was only a small team of 50 people. On the other hand, the Besta side had nearly 200 people. The other side was confident in their numbers, so their words were even more unscrupulous. They also had many arrogant words about Shea himself, such as relying on his wife's nepotism to climb up the ranks, and so on. These cavalry soldiers under Shea's command had followed him all the way from Ilton County to the Scarlet Snow Army. Shea's prestige in the army was outstanding. His martial prowess was unparalleled, and he fought bravely. Although he was strict with his subordinates, he was fair in his rewards and punishment. Moreover, he had led them all the way to the Scarlet Snow Army and made a great contribution. He had already deeply planted his prestige. In the hearts of the cavalry soldiers, their commander was the most invincible existence. How could they allow others to insult him in his face? On the spot, the two sides did not agree with each other and started to fight. Once they started to fight, the truth was revealed. Although the people from the Besta army scolded fiercely, if they really fought, How could they be a match for Shea's elites who had been through hundreds of battles? Speaking of which, the cavalry soldiers that the Besta army had brought out this time were the elites of the headquarters. However, there was a difference between elites and elites. The elites on Shea's side used to be the Rodria cavalry. They had fought in the north and south, then followed Shea and defeated the Scarlet Snow army. They were the real elites who had fought on the battlefield. As for the people on the Besta side, they were much worse. Although the Besta side was also known to have a strong army, but, to be honest, they had not fought many battles. The geographical location of the Besta military area was among the many military areas and prefectures. The hinterland of the empire had been peaceful for a long time. When had they ever fought a war? Their daily training was not bad, but when it came to fighting on the battlefield, to be honest, when they defeated the rebel army a few days ago, it was the first time many of the Besta soldiers had fought. Once they really started to fight, the 50 people under Shea's command beat the nearly 200 people on the Besta side until they were scared witless. They scattered and were defeated. Shea's 50 cavalry soldiers did not give up. They chased after the Besta people and beat them until they were scared witless. Not only did they beat the Besta people until they were scared witless, they even beat them until they ran back to the barracks where the headquarters were stationed. The 50 cavalry soldiers directly blocked the entrance of the Besta people's barracks and cursed. This made Besita go mad with anger. It was fine if they lost the fight, but their own side had already run away. Yet they still chased after them relentlessly and even blocked the entrance of the barracks? Wasn't this bullying too much? Hundreds of people swarmed out from the Besta army, and a grand armed melee broke out between the two sides. In the end, it was only after a few high-ranking officers stepped in that the situation was forcibly brought under control. Shea's troops had also received the news, and a cavalry officer went to receive them and brought the 50 cavalry soldiers back. But the two sides threw down some harsh words, and the relationship between the two sides was now completely strained. After hearing the report, Shea nodded and laughed coldly. Very good. You fought with your allies, and 50 people rushed to the entrance of the barracks. I want to see which of my subordinates has such gut. Where are they? The reporting officer smiled bitterly. They have broken military rules. I have already given the order to confiscate their weapons. They are awaiting punishment in the barracks, awaiting your return. Let's go take a look. Shea laughed coldly and strode in. At the entrance of his main tent, the 50 cavalry soldiers were already lined up in a row, kneeling on one knee. All of them had dejected looks on their faces. Shea looked carefully. Many of them had bruises all over their faces, and some of them even had bloodstains on their faces. These soldiers had already been stripped of their weapons, and most of them had nervous looks on their faces. Only a few of them still had a look of defiance in their eyes. Shea walked over and stood in front of these people. Everyone's faces were filled with worry. Some raised their heads to look at their commander, while others lowered their heads in shame. Shea stood in front of them, arms akimbo, and shouted, "Good, I heard that I have a group of guts under my command. They actually dared to block the entrance of the enemy's barracks and fight. Very gutsy indeed." Why are all of you so worried now? As he spoke, he shouted, "Where is the military judge?" Immediately, an officer answered and walked out from behind him. Shea glanced at the military judge. "Did anyone die?" "No, I heard that only a few dozen of them were injured." "No one died, bullshit." Shea suddenly glared and shouted, "Lao Tzu, who cares if the Besta soldiers die? I'm asking our brothers." The military judge was stunned for a moment, then straightened his back. "My lord, our 50 men are all here. 29 of them are injured. No deaths." Originally, the 50 men had been kneeling in front of him with their heads hung low. But when they heard Shea say, "Lao Tzu, who cares if the Besta soldiers die?" all 50 of them immediately raised their heads, their eyes shining. They looked at their commander, their eyes shining with gratitude. "Humph," Shea said coldly, "military judge, record this." "Yes." The military judge immediately had a soldier bring in the military's punishment book. "Order!" Shea shouted loudly. "Fighting without permission, injuring your allies, violating military regulations. The entire team will be fined 1 month's pay and provisions. The chief offender will receive 50 strokes of the rod, while the rest will receive 30 strokes of the rod. 3 months of leave will be cancelled." After he finished speaking, Shea closed his mouth and looked at the military judge beside him, who quickly recorded it down in the book. Shea nodded, but suddenly his heart skipped a beat. He took 2 steps forward and shouted at the captain of the 50 men in front of him, "Let me ask you, when you went to their camp gate to fight, did you win in the end?" The captain of the cavalry was stunned. He never thought that the general would ask such a question. But he immediately replied in a loud voice, "Reporting to the general, we won. If it weren't for the fact that our men came to our aid and brought us back, I would have already led my men into their camp to cut down their flag." "Good lad. You've got guts." Shea grinned, then turned around and walked in front of the military judge. He looked at the page that the military judge had just recorded in the book. Suddenly, he reached out and tore it down, tearing it into pieces. Under the surprised gaze of the military judge, Shea had already opened his mouth again. "Change the order," Shea said calmly. "The leader will receive 30 strokes of the military rod, the follower will receive 10 strokes of the military rod." When these words were spoken, the 50 people below were greatly shaken. 50 pairs of eyes were firmly fixed on Shea, and everyone's face was full of excitement. Shea pointed at the captain and said, "You received the military rod. From tomorrow onwards, you will be transferred to my personal guards." The captain's whole body trembled. He looked at Shea, his throat choked with emotion. He slammed his head on the ground and said in a hoarse voice, "Die for the general." Shea nodded, then turned around and left without looking at the soldiers. Behind him, a burst of thunderous cheers could be heard. Seeing their general leave, the soldiers who had been punished cheered. It was as if they had done a great service instead of being punished. The military judge couldn't help but sigh. Looking at Shea's back, he whispered, "The general treats his men like this. Who wouldn't die for him?" To be continued. If you want to know what will happen, please go to www.chidian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Nights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.